Chapter 793. On the other side, Meng Hun led his troops to avoid the enemy and sneaked toward Jiamen Pass. They and Jiang Pingji had agreed to use the whistling arrow as the signal to attack and concentrate their forces to break through the pass. It was the new moon that night, so the sky was dark and it was easy to make mistakes. As Meng Hun waited nervously for the news, a messenger hurried over and reported to him, "Captain Meng, there's a whistling arrow in the direction of the camp." Meng Hun was stunned for a moment and said, "This is definitely not our order. Go scout again and report back as soon as you find anything." The messenger retreated after receiving the order. Not long after, he returned to report, "There's a fire in the direction of our camp. It looks like the enemy has rushed into the center of the camp." In the dark night, the horizon had already been dyed orange, like the last rays of the sunset. Meng Hun got up in surprise and walked to the high ground to look in the direction of the camp. There was indeed a fire. The whistling arrow must have been fired by the enemy. With his good eyesight and the strong fire in the distance, Meng Hun could vaguely see some black dots. Based on the intensity of the fire, Meng Hun could guess how tragic it was over there. Fu Wang was bound to suffer heavy casualties this time, and the Meng family was bound to lose everything. Meng Hun suppressed the joy in his heart, but he couldn't help but smile. The Mengs had suffered a double loss. Losing more than 10,000 soldiers was not a big deal. But if even their strongest general was lost, it would be a huge loss. He coughed and asked the messenger seriously, "Is there any movement in Jiamen Pass?" The messenger shook his head and said, "We've been keeping an eye on it, but it's still peaceful." Meng Hun said, "Go scout again. If the Lord sends a signal, we must support her immediately." The fire in the camp was so strong that it could be seen from afar. It was like a ball of orange paint that pushed back the thick ink. Jiamen Pass was on high ground, so it wouldn't take long for the enemy to notice the fire. The Lord inside the pass would see it too. Meng Hun was sure that he would receive Jiang Pingji's signal soon. At that moment, the soldiers inside Jiamen Pass also noticed the strange burning clouds in the sky. However, they did not realize that Fu Wang had fallen into a trap. They thought that Fu Wang had led his troops to a great victory and burned down Jiang Pingji's camp. The soldiers guarding the pass noticed the abnormality in the distance and immediately passed the news to the generals who stayed behind. Because of the unequal distribution of military merits, Fu Wang could only bring the elites who were close to the Mengs this time. His own trusted subordinates had to be hidden for a while. However, he was not worried about leaving Jiamen Pass to his trusted subordinates who had fought with him for many years. Upon receiving the news that Jiang Pingji's camp was on fire, the confidant did not suspect anything. His thoughts were similar to those of the soldiers. He couldn't be blamed for being careless. Ever since Fu Wang entered the battlefield, he had never been defeated. Because Fu Wang was born to be brave and strong, other people always thought that he was a brute with only muscles and no brains when they saw his appearance. In fact, he was not. This person was cunning and paranoid. He had always viewed war as hunting, and was very patient when waiting for his prey. As long as the opportunity was not ripe, no matter how noisy the outside world was, he would not make a single move. He was as steady as a statue. For example, when Fu Yang was seriously ill, the Mengs came to recruit him after the 7th day of Fu Yang's death. They even wanted to take over the troops that Fu Yang had left behind. The rumors were not groundless. Many people suspected that Fu Yang's death was related to the Mengs. Even though it had nothing to do with the Mengs, Fu Yang and the Mengs were sworn enemies. It was too much for the Mengs to recruit him after the 7th day of his death. At that time, his trusted subordinates thought that Fu Wang would explode and fight the Mengs to the death. But what happened in the end? In the end, Fu Wang calmly accepted the Mengs' offer. He protected the elites of Fu Yang's old troops and laid low to cultivate his forces. In order to achieve his goals, Fu Wang was too patient. This style and his high martial arts skills made Fu Wang quite popular on the battlefield. He had made great contributions to the Mengs and had never been defeated. Don't panic. Let's stabilize the situation in the pass first. Fu Wang's soldiers had a kind of blind trust in their general. They did not think that their general would be defeated. Send a team to the front line to check. Lu Shi is not a mediocre person like the Wulong County chief. He won't give up easily. Everyone believed that Fu Wang would win. But when they thought of Lu Shi's previous achievements, they felt a little uncertain. To be on the safe side, it was better to send someone to the front line to check. If the general did not bring enough troops, they could prepare for reinforcements. As they were talking, there was a commotion outside. It was so loud that everyone in the hall could hear it. Who's making noise outside? Hearing the commotion, Fu Wang's trusted subordinate raised his eyebrows, and his face was full of anger. Wild wolves like to live in groups. Although they were not the strongest among the wild beasts, they lived in packs and had extraordinary combat strength. Their internal discipline was strict. Under the influence of the wild wolves, Fu Wang was unusually strict with his troops. He could be considered the most ruthless among the Ming's retainers. Under normal circumstances, no soldier would dare to blatantly violate military discipline. The noisy soldier was caught. He did not dare to delay and reported breathlessly, "Deputy General, there's a fire in the pass." A fire in the pass? The eyes of the trusted subordinate twitched, and a cold chill rose in his heart. What fire? He strode out and looked down from a high vantage point. Sure enough, there was a fire in Jiamen Pass. Who is the arsonist? The soldier answered, "We don't know yet. The fire was already burning when we found it." At that moment, another soldier came to report. The arsonist had been found. "Deputy General, the guards sent by Lu Shi are rebelling. They are heading toward Guanmen." What? Upon hearing this news, that person's heart skipped a beat, and a chill spread through his entire chest. He thought of a possibility and hurriedly said, "Could it be that those guards discovered that something had happened in Lu Shi's camp? That's why. Oh no, quickly send people to stop them." As soon as he gave the order, a dozen sharp bamboo whistles sounded in the sky above Jiamen Pass. Looking in the direction of the sound, one could vaguely make out a dozen whistling arrows. Now, the general who stayed behind to guard the pass gave up on his previous guess. What followed was an even more ominous feeling. The movement of the 100 guards was not a coincidence. They did not act after seeing the change in Lu Shi's camp. It was clearly premeditated. Thinking of this, he hurriedly ordered the soldiers to stop Jiang Pingji and the others from approaching Guanmen. Report. The messenger dragged his voice and rushed over on horseback. He did not even catch his breath when he got off his horse. He hurriedly cupped his hands and knelt on one knee. "Deputy General, a large number of enemies suddenly appeared outside the pass. The number is unknown." The general who stayed behind to guard the pass turned pale. He subconsciously looked at the orange burning cloud in the sky. This is Lu Shi's evil plan. Oh no, the general is in trouble. The sudden fire in the pass. The guards sent by Lu Shi rushed to the pass, and an unknown number of enemies appeared outside. It was clearly premeditated. If that was the case, it meant that Lu Shi had not fallen for the general's plan. Instead, it was the general who had fallen for it. Gather the troops and face the enemy. Chapter 794. For that night, not only did Fu Wang make ample preparations, but Jiang Pingji was also armed to the teeth. Meng Hun led his troops and brought a large number of siege weapons. He wanted to take down Jiamen Pass in the shortest time possible and end the battle as soon as possible. The enemy had the advantage of occupying the pass. Jiang Pingji had 30,000 soldiers, most of which were Lu Shi soldiers. Logically, there was no need for a clear division between father and daughter. But the two armies trained differently, and the soldiers didn't have enough time to adapt to each other. Jiang Pingji knew that if she couldn't take down Jiamen Pass in a thunderous manner, it would be a Pyrrhic victory, even if she could win when the enemy recovered and reorganized their forces. To her, it was a complete failure to achieve victory after losing a large number of troops. Wanzhou was a large territory with few soldiers. She had no other assets other than money. If she lost a large number of soldiers at Jiamen Pass, she would be in a difficult situation when she returned to Wanzhou. Li Yin watched his lord wander around the battlefield. He was tired, but at the same time, he had the urge to compete with her. The 100 or so guards were all elites of the army. Individually they were very strong. They skillfully formed a small formation of 100 men, and advanced toward the gate of Jiamen Pass like a killing machine. They attracted the firepower of Meng Hun, who was outside, and he shared the burden for them. With the enemy attacking from within, and without Fu Wang, the soldiers at Jiamen Pass were in a state of chaos, and were routed like a mountain. Due to the narrow terrain of the nearby alleys, the enemy was unable to encircle and annihilate them on a large scale. This was very advantageous for Jiang Pingji and the rest. She and Li Yun's eyes were red from the killing. The weapons in their hands were already dyed red with fresh blood. Flesh and broken limbs filled their vision. Apart from the sounds of fighting, screams, clashing armors, footsteps, and the sound of weapons piercing flesh, there was almost no other sound. Although she wasn't strong, she was shockingly strong. She held her spear horizontally and single-handedly pushed more than a dozen people in front of her a few meters away. Li Yun attacked from behind. Li Yun used the whistling arrow as a signal to inform the enemy of their location. He also set fire to the place to cause trouble. However, more and more enemies were surging toward them, and the situation was getting worse. "My lord, there are too many enemies." Li Yun's armor already had a few cuts. Although he was not injured, he looked as if he had just floated in a sea of blood. He was in a sorry state. "I don't care. Charge." There were only about 100 of them. If they did not use their rising momentum to fight their way out, they would only be drowned by the waves of enemies. Jiang Pingji said calmly, "Han Mei, send 2 more people to cover me." In terms of combat power, Jiang Pingji could beat everyone by herself, but compared to her combat power, her defense was far weaker. In gaming terms, she was an all-round cloth-armored class that could engage in melee combat and long-range attacks. Her only weakness was that she was fragile. No matter how strong she was still a human. Her body of flesh and blood could not defend against swords, spears, swords, and halberds. If it was her in the past, the situation would be different. A normal bullet hitting her would be equivalent to a mosquito bite. Li Yun did not hesitate, and hurriedly picked 2 people to cooperate with Jiang Pingji's actions. Then, he knew his lord's true colors on the battlefield. She was like the god of death who had descended. From the beginning of the charge until now, a quarter of an hour had passed. The high-intensity battle made Li Yun feel tired. On the other hand, his lord's situation was completely different. Her previous actions were just a basic warm-up. As time passed, not only did she not feel tired, but she charged and killed more and more fiercely. The enemy's heavy armor for defense was as thin as a piece of paper in her eyes. She alone killed so many enemies that they were afraid and did not dare to advance. "Hold the shields and form a formation." Jiang Pingji killed for a while. She seemed to have a premonition. She used violence to force the enemy back and retreated at the same time. She commanded loudly. The other guards hurriedly raised their shields and formed an iron tortoise formation. Their defense was impenetrable. The arrows that flew from afar hit the surface of the shields. "Advance! Crush them!" While the audience in the streaming room was excited, and the soldiers were confident because of her, Jiang Pingji was still so calm that it made people's hair stand on end. Everyone stepped on the corpses of their comrades and countless enemies to advance. The audience in the streaming room was used to Jiang Pingji's charging stance, but most of the time it was scenes of her fighting on horseback. It was rare to see her fighting on land, especially in such a violent way. Jiang Pingji fought on horseback. The audience's gaze followed her rapid movements. Most of their attention was also attracted by her figure. Their hearts were swayed by this young general dressed in red and silver armor. They rarely paid attention to the enemy soldiers who had fallen from their horses. When she relied on her legs and charged forward step by step, the audience's attention was involuntarily attracted by the enemy's corpses. Crush, advance, trample. The ground under her feet was not mud or bricks. Instead, it was corpses that were still steaming hot. At this moment, the audience was strongly aware of Jiang Pingji's other identity, the butcher. They continuously used whistling arrows to inform the outside. Meng Hun organized the attack and tacitly concentrated the troops in that direction. They worked together from the inside and outside. It was not only to coordinate, but also to coordinate with each other to share the enemy's firepower and destroy their psychological defenses. Jiang Pingji was a technical expert. She also had Zhang Ping, a member of the Mahis family, by her side. Meng Hun ordered his men to push up the arrow towers. Not only did they build ladders from the ground, but they also built ladders from the sky. The cloud of arrows and catapults were already in place. They fired several cannons at the top of the wall. Jiamen Pass was indeed a dangerous pass. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Even though Meng Hun had made ample preparations and had the upper hand, once the troops inside the pass were united, he would not be able to gain much advantage. Even so, Meng Hun had no way to retreat. He could only attack with all his might. If he could not break through Jiamen Pass tonight, he would have to atone for his sins with his death. Why? Didn't they see the whistling arrows flying above Jiamen Pass? Their lord was still in the city. If they failed to break through, Jiang Pingji would die sooner or later. Meng Hun thought about it carefully. Their lord's death was caused by his incompetence. How could he live? Attack. In fact, when the troops inside the city realized that they had fallen into a trap, and that their general was likely to be ambushed, their morale was already shaken. The general who stayed behind to guard the city had some reputation in the army, so he could barely keep the situation under control. However, Meng Hun's attack was too fierce. Both sides had only attacked the city for one round, but the number of casualties kept rising. The huge pressure formed a thick cloud that shrouded every soldier's heart. To add fuel to the fire, there were fierce tigers outside the city and fierce wolves inside the city. Jiang Pingji's whistling arrows could not only inform Meng Hun, but also put pressure on the enemy's psychological defenses. Chapter 795. Useless fools. Not even 100 men can stop them. The general who stayed behind to guard the place was burning with anxiety, and his rage almost overwhelmed his rationality. The battle outside the city was fierce, and it was nighttime. The longer the two sides fought, the greater the loss. In comparison, the mental pressure of the soldiers at Jiamen Pass was far greater than that of the troops outside the city. The stone cannons of the catapults were fired as soon as they were ready. Every time they hit the wall would shake violently. The soldiers on the wall had the illusion that the Jiamen Pass, which was usually impregnable, was about to be torn down by a violent demolition team. Of course, it was just an illusion. Jiamen Pass was known as one of the most dangerous passes in the world. It was not that easy to demolish it. However, the huge stones rained down from the sky like a meteor shower. Not only did they hit the wall, but they also smashed into the city. Because of the whistling arrow, Meng Hun ordered the cannoneers to avoid that area. As for the other areas, smash them. Arrows rained down like a tide. Stones filled the sky, and ladders were set up outside the city. Soldiers carried shields to block the stones and slowly climbed up. Under the cover of dozens of catapults, the soldiers on the wall did not have the energy to stop the enemies who were trying to climb up the wall. Deputy General, bad news. The enemy is closing in on the gate. Stop them. Are we going to watch them open the gate from the inside? The general felt like he was about to explode. His general had fallen into a trap, and his life was in danger. The enemy was pressuring him from both inside and outside the city, and he was almost out of breath. But he still had a bottom line. People could die, but Jiamen Pass could not be lost. Even with Jiang Pingji's help, they were still in a dangerous situation after losing the narrow terrain. There were enemies on all sides, and it would not be easy for them to break through. Even though Jiang Pingji could cut through the enemy's formation like a sharp knife, the advance of the troops was getting slower and slower, and the number of corpses of their comrades was increasing. There were too many enemies, and it was impossible to hold the line with only a few hundred people. If someone did not react in time due to exhaustion, they would be turned into a hornet's nest in the next second. Along the way, the corpses of the enemy and their comrades were strewn all over the road. The moment they fell, they were quickly trampled into meat paste. If it weren't for Meng Hun using the catapults to cover and share the firepower, there wouldn't be many of them left. Jiang Pingji's eyes widened with determination. Her breathing was no longer as steady as before. It was rapid and heavy, and her cheeks were covered with the enemy's blood. If one looked closely, they could see thick blood hanging from her eyelashes. The scarlet color was almost black, as if it was going to contaminate her inky eyes. Not only was Jiang Pingji in a sorry state, but Li Yun, who was engaged in a bloody battle at the side, also looked like a terrifying lunatic. Hold the shields, shrink the formation. The number of troops decreased sharply. Jiang Pingji ordered the remaining troops to shrink the line of defense to reduce the pressure and prevent them from being overwhelmed by the enemy. The gate of Jiamen Pass was less than 300 feet away from them, but there were countless enemies between the two places. This was a great moat that they had to cross. The power of a catapult was quite terrifying. Not only could it shake the walls of Jiamen Pass, but it could also destroy the buildings in the city. A large number of soldiers had gathered in the city to surround and suppress the enemy. The boulders that were thrown out did not even need to be aimed. They would hit the target. Jiang Pingji and the others advanced another 100 feet. Her ferocious fighting ability terrified the enemy, and they almost lost their courage. They thought that the last part of the journey would be extremely fierce, but it turned out to be even easier than before. There were two main reasons for this. First, the range of the catapult was limited. Although it could be thrown into the city, it was not far. The closer Jiang Pingji and the others got to the gate of Jiamen Pass, the closer they were to the catapult's shooting range. Second, Jiang Pingji killed too many people. The more enemies she killed, the less the enemies in her way dared to fight her. Jiang Pingji led the remaining 30 people into the city. Li Yun was shocked to find that the city gate had been nailed shut with a thick wooden plank. Even though he was a good-tempered person, he could not help but curse. The viewers in the streaming room were even more furious. It was not easy for them to fight their way out of the city, only to see the city gate nailed shut. How did it feel? For example, a patient was seriously ill. He begged his parents to raise enough money for the operation before the disease worsened, only to find out that the operation fee was not 100,000, but 1,000,000. The impact of falling from heaven to hell was indescribable. Even though Li Yun was a man, he felt hopeless. His eyes could not help but redden. They were only separated by a few feet of thick city wall. Outside the city were their own people, but at such a close distance, they were separated by life and death. "My lord, the city gate has been nailed shut." Li Yun's voice was trembling. It was not a big deal if the generals died in battle, but if they dragged the lord down with them, they would be incompetent. Jiang Pingji glanced at the messy thick wooden plank on the city gate. Her expression became more ferocious and fierce. The viewers in the streaming room were in an uproar. Although they did not participate in the bloody battle, they were worried. They were so close to success, but they did not expect the enemy to play dirty. No wonder there were so many soldiers guarding the city gate. It turned out that they were messing with these things. Jiang Pingji said calmly, "Han Mei, go and command the defense. Try to hold on for a while longer." The city gate was narrow, so they only needed to defend against the enemy from one side. It was very advantageous for them. However, no matter how advantageous it was, they could not hold on for too long. Jiang Pingji bore the brunt of the energy consumption, but the other soldiers were also under a lot of pressure. She could operate like a machine for a long time without her condition deteriorating, but the others could not. "Yes, I will," Li Yun agreed. Even though he did not know what Jiang Pingji was going to do, his lord gave him a great sense of security. What was Jiang Pingji going to do? Tear down the city gate with her bare hands? At that moment Meng Hun, who was outside the city gate, felt his heart palpitate. He had not heard his lord's warning arrow for a long time. It was either inconvenient or thinking of the latter possibility. Meng Hun hurriedly suppressed this terrifying thought. "Impossible. My lord will definitely be blessed by the heavens." At that moment, Meng Hun was extremely regretful. Why did he not strongly dissuade and stop his lord when she was courting death? Jiamen Pass was indeed a dangerous pass. Even such a fierce attack could not take down the city wall. The more it was like this, the more anxious he became. The enemy soldiers inside the city were worried about their commander. Wasn't Meng Hun also worried about his lord outside the city? He could only order the attack to continue, his heart filled with apprehension and hope. It was at that moment that the general who stayed behind said fiercely, "They must be killed." He had ordered his men to temporarily seal the city gate. He was prepared to catch Jiang Pingji and the others like turtles in a jar. At that moment, There was a violent tremor under their feet, followed by the sound of the city gate being attacked. Are these people using siege weapons? If that was the case, it would be interesting. The enemy's allies were inside the city gate, so they could kill each other. Chapter 796. It wasn't a siege weapon? If it wasn't a siege weapon, why was there such a huge commotion? The general was stunned. Did Lu Shi's army have a siege weapon that was even more powerful than the catapults? Before he could recover from his shock, another crash came. Amidst the shouts and screams, the sound of the gate breaking was particularly clear. He was about to ask when he saw a messenger running up the wall. His expression was one of shock and horror. Bad news, Deputy General. The enemy broke the gate with their bare hands. The night was dark, but torches were lit inside the Gemin Pass, so they could see clearly. Even though the surroundings were in chaos, they could still see the situation inside the city. That death god had actually smashed the city gate from the inside out, creating a crack in it. With the first impact, the thick wood sealing the gate broke, and the thick and heavy gate cracked, extending out like a spider web. With the second impact, the gate broke open. Not only were the guards inside the city shocked, but the soldiers outside the city were also stunned. Jiang Pingji quickly tore down the heavy gate. She gathered her chi and her dantian and shouted, "The gate is broken! Break through immediately!" She used a special technique to make her voice reach Meng Hun's ears. He recognized the owner of the voice, and was so excited that he almost cried. He immediately led the troops to help Jiang Pingji. The gate of Gemin Pass had been broken, and the scales of victory were completely tipped in their favor. With Meng Hun's troops, Jiang Pingji and the others escaped. The enemy troops inside the city were in chaos. The general who stayed behind almost fell when he heard the news. He couldn't help but feel dizzy. Gemin Pass could not be defended any longer. Not long before the fall of Gemin Pass, Feng Zhen and the others had also won a great victory. They had killed more than 2,000 enemy soldiers, severely injured or burned to death, and the remaining 2,000 soldiers had all become prisoners. More importantly, they had captured the enemy's commander Fu Wang. Deputy Commander Dian, you captured the enemy's commander alive. This is a great achievement. Faced with this result, Feng Zhen was both surprised and pleasantly surprised. He praised Dian Yin profusely. He had been wondering if he could capture Fu Wang alive, but he didn't expect Dian Yin to actually do it. Yang Si also smiled and congratulated him. Then, he went back to what he had to do. After reorganizing the troops, he still had to support Gemin Pass. Dian Yin, the one who had made the contribution, had a sour expression on his face. This detail made Feng Zhen suspicious. Vice Commandant Dian? Dian Yin snorted heavily and said, "An unfair advantage." Feng Zhen's smile faded slightly. He said, "The art of war is the art of deception. We have never paid attention to such pretentious fake things." Hearing Feng Zhen's words, Dian Yin knew that the other party had misunderstood. He wasn't saying that the strategist's strategy was too sinister, and that he had an unfair advantage. Dian Yin said, "That Fu Wang is very strange. If not, this general would not have been able to capture him alive." Although he said he was captured alive, his face was somewhat red. Obviously, Fu Wang had been affected by the smoke, and had somehow fallen into the bonfire. Fortunately, Dian Yan's actions were quick, and Fu Wang's body was wrapped in heavy armor, so the fire did not really burn him. The battle had just subsided when Dian Yin saw the medics treating the wounded. He asked the military doctor to take a look at Fu Wang. What was the result? Fu Wang had consumed a lot of sleeping grass, so he was tired and his strength was probably not even half of his peak. That was why Dian Yan had taken advantage of him. Hearing Dian Yan's words, Feng Zhen smiled and said, "Good luck is also strength. Vice Commandant Dian, why are you so conflicted? After all, you were the one who captured Fu Wang alive, not someone else. You can't deny this credit. This Fu Wang is still very useful to my lord." Dian Yin initially wanted to cut off Fu Wang's head, but he considered the bigger picture, and did not do it in the end. A commander was different from an ordinary general. If he could be captured alive, his value would be much higher than a dead man. Not only could Dian Yin not kill Fu Wang, he had to make sure he was well taken care of. Even if he was a captive, people were divided into different ranks. On the other side, the situation at Jiamen Pass was hopeless. All sorts of bad news had crushed the morale of the defending troops. More importantly, their commander might have met with misfortune. To them, the commander was their backbone. Once he died in battle, their morale would fall to rock bottom. Meng Hun and Li Yin led the troops into Jiamen Pass. As for the troublesome lord, please don't be reckless anymore. My little heart can't take this kind of stimulation. As they wished, Jiang Pingji did not show up during the final stages of the siege. The wounds on her body were only bandaged with a piece of cloth. Although she did not show up, she did not stop there. She led a group of people and rushed into the center of Jiamen Pass. Along the way, they occasionally encountered enemy soldiers who were fleeing in panic. If they resisted, they would be killed. If they surrendered, they would be tied up. Where did Huijun go? Jiamen Pass was in chaos that night. Huijun would be in a dangerous situation. If she was unlucky enough to meet those soldiers who did not care about their lives, thinking of this, Jiang Pingji could not help but quicken her pace. She rushed directly to Fu Wang's former residence. Huijun was well versed in the ways of the world. She was calm and intelligent. She was not one of those reckless, naive girls. It was chaotic outside. If she did not find a place to hide and instead ran around, she would be in big trouble. No matter what kind of group it was, there would always be black sheep, especially in ancient times when the people were of low moral standards. With Huijuan's looks, if she was alone and accidentally met a villain, she would be in a dangerous situation. Huijun. The army had taken over the area, so Jiang Pingji could move around freely. After searching for a while, she finally found some traces of Fu Wang's sleeping quarters. Looking at the scattered hairpins and clothes on the ground, Jiang Pingji's face suddenly darkened. Her eyes were full of murderous intent. At that moment, she heard Huijuan's timid voice. Is that Langjun? Jiang Pingji followed the voice and finally found Huijun in a very secluded corner. Who did this? Jiang Pingji's voice was cold as if ice had been mixed in it. Huijun was wearing a loose linen undershirt that was not even properly buttoned. Her lips were slightly swollen, and there were tear stains at the corners of her eyes. The ambiguous marks on her neck and collarbone were particularly obvious. Even a blind man could see what she had been through. Who did this? Jiang Pingji asked again when Huijun did not answer. Only then did Huijun move her stiff and curled legs. She crawled out of her hiding place with a smile on her face. Did Langjun win? Jiang Pingji felt as if someone had stabbed her in the heart. She felt both helpless and heartbroken. You're really stupid. Jiang Pingji was good at deducing the truth from the smallest details. She could guess who had touched Huijun after thinking about it calmly. Langjun, why are you saying this? Huijun lowered her head. The hair on her forehead fell and covered a patch of shadow. She said, I'm useless. After thinking about it, it seems that this is the only way I can help Langjun. Moreover, I did it willingly. It's not okay even if I did it willingly. She was a person, not a commodity. Huijun sighed. She said, Langjun, to tell you the truth, I really don't feel wronged. Others don't say anything about my situation. But what would they think? I know very well. I can't marry anyone in this life. And it's even more impossible for me to be a concubine. But if I'm alone for the rest of my life, I feel that the days ahead are long and unbearable. If it's possible, I want to be willful for once and make my own decisions. She caressed her lower abdomen and looked at Jiang Pingji with her eyes shining. Chapter 797. If this is really your idea, I will respect your choice. Jiang Pingji sighed. She was not a person who liked to force things. Everyone had their own choices. Since Huijun had chosen this path, she could not arbitrarily ask her to change it. Huijuan's gaze was gentle. She nodded at Jiang Pingji and thanked her. Thank you for your understanding, Langjun. To be honest, Huijun did not lie against her will this time. She really wanted to give birth to a child of her own. When she was young, she was ignorant and did not know what it meant to lose the ability to have children. But to this day, she still remembered the scene of her birth mother forcing her to be drugged. That crazy woman even tied her hands and feet and pressed down hard on her lower abdomen. The heart-wrenching pain that spread throughout her entire body still made her tremble uncontrollably when she recalled it in her dreams. After a few times, Huijun's body was completely ruined. It was impossible for her to have children again. That was the wound in Huijun's heart. It could not heal for a long time. She could only try her best to ignore its existence. She did not expect that she would miraculously get pregnant after so many years. If the child's father was not the late emperor of Dongqing, Huijun would have had the urge to give birth to the child. However, she could only laugh bitterly and use the child in her womb to get rid of the second prince's wife, Anyina. Since then, Huijun knew that her broken body had completely recovered. Her lost ability to have children had also returned. That meant that she could use a man to get pregnant and give birth to a child that was related to her by blood. Seeing that Huijun had made up her mind, Jiang Pengji could only support her. However, getting pregnant is not something else. How can you guarantee that you will get pregnant in one go? If it was in her era, she could directly go to a specialized institution for a minor surgery if she wanted to have a child. However, it was different in this era. The fertility method was still the most ancient and primitive. There was a certain probability that a woman could get pregnant after a man and a woman had intercourse. Huijun lowered her head and said in a voice as soft as a mosquito, "I used the easy pregnancy pill that you gave me earlier." Easy pregnancy pill? Jiang Pengji furrowed her brows. She remembered that it had fallen into Lu Huan's hands. Why did Huijun have it too? She asked directly. Didn't I ask you to pass the easy pregnancy pill to Lu Huan? Huijun explained. The easy pregnancy pill was indeed in Lu Huan's hands. But do you know what she did after getting it? What did you do? Huijun said. Lu Huan has always been on guard against me. Naturally, she would not easily consume the elixir. This person was naturally vicious. He actually ground some medicinal powder, mixed it in his food, and gave it to a woman who did odd jobs several times. In order to verify the miraculous effects of the pill, she even sent someone to secretly defile the woman. The woman did not have any children for 3 years after she married into her husband's family, but a month after that incident, the woman's pulse of pregnancy was diagnosed. To be able to make a woman who had not had any movement for 3 years pregnant in one go, the effect of this medicine was too shocking. Huijun thought of her own situation. For some strange reason, she secretly kept some medicinal powder for the elixir. After listening, Jiang Pengji understood what was going on. This thing can indeed allow a woman's body to enter the best state of pregnancy, greatly increasing the chances of conceiving. In other words, as long as her luck wasn't too bad, Huijun would soon become a mother. In order to reform Huijun's body, Jiang Pengji had used up all the cards in the system. This system card was completely different from the skill books sold by the system. The skill books sold by the system were made from the soul of the previous host, extracting the memories related to the skill from the soul. When the host used the skill books, they actually merged with this part of the soul and seamlessly received the memories contained in it. In essence, the system card was a condensation of pure energy. It was beneficial and harmless to the human body. It was a completely different concept from the skill books. However, she still had a question. Why did it have to be Fu Wang? Fu Wang's position was completely hostile to Jiang Pengji. She was pregnant with Fu Wang's child. Wasn't she afraid that Jiang Pengji would be disgusted? Faced with this question, Huijun hesitated for a while before revealing the truth. I have no intention of telling the child the truth about her father. Apart from her and Lang Jun, no one else would know about this. Jiang Pengji asked. You don't intend to let Fu Wang know? Huijun was stunned for a moment. She asked with uncertainty, will the Lord let that person live? She thought that Fu Wang would definitely die. Jiang Pengji was speechless. She had an inexplicable impulse to sympathize with Fu Wang. No matter what, he is a valiant general. If we can recruit him, of course we won't kill him. If Fu Wang died in battle, it would be difficult to recruit his old subordinates. It might even be a ticking time bomb. No matter what, Fu Wang's value alive was far greater than his value dead. Therefore, it was Huijun's turn to be stunned. What should she do if things went beyond her expectations? After a while, she looked down at her right hand caressing her abdomen. Her expression was particularly interesting. Then what should we do? Her face was pale, and her swollen lips had lost their color. If Fu Wang died, there would be no evidence. But if he was alive, it would be awkward. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Jiang Pingji comforted Hui Jun to prevent her from doing something stupid. Thank you, Lang Jun. Hui Jun felt relieved, and her eyes became moist. Silly girl. Jiang Pingji rubbed her long hair with a smile. Tidy up. It's still chaotic outside. Don't run around. Although they had conquered Gemin Pass, it was still very dangerous outside. If Hui Jun ran around, she could easily get into trouble. Okay. Hui Jun nodded obediently. After settling her down, Jiang Pingji sent some people to guard the place to prevent the army from attacking. My lord, great news. Meng Hun was overjoyed from afar. He said to Jiang Pingji, Deputy Commander Dian has captured Fu Wang alive. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and searched for memories related to Fu Wang. Fu Wang was captured by Dian Yan? She asked coldly. Where is Fu Wang now? While Jiang Pingji was looking for Hui Jun, Feng Zhen, and the others had already gathered their troops and rushed over. They didn't expect their lord to be so efficient. She didn't even give them a chance to help. Meng Hun was so excited that he didn't notice Jiang Pingji's abnormality. He's been captured, but... Meng Hun frowned and said doubtfully. But, the military doctor said that Fu Wang ate a lot of sleeping grass powder by mistake. He won't wake up until the next day. Jiang Pingji stopped in her tracks and asked in surprise. Fu Wang ate sleeping grass by mistake. Meng Hun nodded and said with certainty. The doctor diagnosed him several times. He did eat sleeping grass by mistake. Meng Hun was also confused. Fu Wang wasn't a careless person. He was very particular about his diet. It was impossible for him to eat sleeping grass by mistake. Could it be that the rumors had worked? Did the soldiers close to the Mengs drug him and plot against him? Chapter 798. After successfully breaking through Jiamen Pass, Jiang Pingji ordered the army to rest and reorganize within the pass, and clean up the battlefield. She left the heavy tasks to Feng Zhen and Yang Si. She took a break, and became a hands-off shopkeeper. Jiang Pingji's current condition was not suitable for dealing with worldly matters, so she could only rest for the time being. How did Lang Jun get so badly injured? Now that Hui Jun was serving Jiang Pingji, she naturally had the opportunity to see things that others could not see. When Jiang Pingji took off her battle robe and washed the blood off her body, Hui Jun was shocked to find that there were large bruises on her skin. There were a few open wounds on her waist, back, and arms. The shorter ones were only the length of a knuckle, while the longer ones were the length of an adult's palm. The wounds had stopped bleeding, but they still looked horrible. Hui Jun could not come back to her senses. Who injured you? Hui Jun asked quickly. When she realized that she had asked a stupid question, she secretly blamed herself. There were so many wounds. Naturally, they were from the war. Hui Jun had mixed feelings when she thought about how Jiang Pingji had not treated her wounds immediately, but had instead searched for her. She was touched and bitter at the same time. She bit her lip and held back her emotions as she helped Jiang Pingji bandage her wounds. Injuries are common in war. It's good enough that I didn't die on the battlefield. How can I expect to be unscathed? Jiang Pingji said nonchalantly. She put on her inner garment with her gloves, and fastened the thin belt on the side of her jacket. Her physical fitness was excellent. The wounds would heal perfectly in less than half a month without leaving a scar. As mentioned before, Jiang Pingji was strong in combat, but she was still made of flesh and blood. Knives, spears, swords, and halberds could still hurt her. However, she had deliberately dodged them, so the wounds were not deep and they were not fatal. As for the bruises on her body, they were caused by her being too impatient when she broke through the gate. She did not control her strength well, so she hurt herself. To be honest, Jiang Pingji could have been unscathed, but she was not fighting alone. She had companions and subordinates with her, and she had to protect them. 1 or 2 wounds could save their lives. It was worth it. These wounds will heal in half a month. Don't tell anyone else. Otherwise, Zishur and Jing Rong will worry for nothing. Jiang Pingji felt a headache coming on as she thought about the chaotic battle at Jiamen Pass. She had a premonition that after the counselors found out about this matter, they would definitely guard it to the death and not let her wander around blindly. Therefore, she decided that she would not go against the wind and commit crimes. She would be a little more obedient for now and wait for the wind to blow over. I'm just feeling heartache. Previously, Fu Wang had only left a shallow wound on Jiang Pingji's arm. This had been on Huijuan's mind for a long time. Now that there were large patches of bruises and wounds, how could she remain calm? Don't move, Langjun. I'll use some medicinal wine to dissolve the clotted blood. Jiang Pingji could only agree to her request. It couldn't be helped. Huijuan's reddened eyes were too pitiful. It was as if she would cry if she didn't agree. Langjun, your hand. Why is it so black? Huijun served Jiang Pingji the medicinal wine, and noticed that her right hand was also covered in black blood. It didn't look like a blood clot, but more like a birthmark. But she clearly remembered that Langjuan's right hand was a piece of white jade. When did he get such an ugly birthmark? Jiang Pingji followed her gaze and looked at her hand. She said calmly, it's fine. The black blood mark on her hand was the level 9 loyalty talisman left by the time traveler. It was useless. Jiang Pingji kept it because she wanted to use it to seduce the time traveler. After treating the wound, Huijun still unconsciously pouted, her expression especially stubborn. After a night of chaos, Gemin Pass had a new owner. When Fu Wang woke up from his deep sleep and saw the unfamiliar scenery, he tensed up and jumped up in a defensive posture. Ouch! He gasped in pain and moved his arm. Only then did he realize that the wound on his body had been treated. But his movement was too big, and the wound that had just stopped bleeding opened up again. Bright red blood seeped out. The people outside heard the noise and came in to check. Fu Wang's expression changed when he saw the clothes the person was wearing. You're awake. Are you feeling well? The doctor knew Fu Wang's identity, so he didn't dare to approach him. He only dared to wait at the door. Who are you? Fu Wang had already guessed the truth, but he still couldn't accept it. He had become someone else's prisoner. The doctor still didn't dare to approach him. He bowed and said, I'm a doctor sent by my lord to take care of the general's wounds. The general has many wounds, and it took a lot of effort to stop the bleeding. It's not a good time to be angry, and we can't make a big fuss, lest the wounds open up again. Fu Wang didn't listen to him. Your lord, Lu Shi. Looking at the surrounding scenery, it was obvious that they were at Jiamen Pass. How long had it been? Lu Shi had already broken through the pass? Fu Wang couldn't help but worry about his trusted aide, who had stayed behind at Jiamen Pass. Yes. Fu Wang's expression changed again and again when he got the confirmation. After a while he calmed down. The winner is the king, the loser is the bandit. A loss is a loss. Has your lord thought about how to deal with me? The doctor smiled. My lord didn't tell me anything. She just told me to take care of the general. The doctor thought that Fu Wang would kill him in a rage, so he was ready to run. Who would have thought that this man was exceptionally cooperative? The doctor immediately changed his dressing and rebandaged his bleeding wound. Fu Wang's wounds were more serious than Jiang Pingji's. They were long and deep. When the military doctor changed his dressing and bandaged his wound, the onlookers thought it was painful, but this man did not even frown. Fu Wang thought that Jiang Pingji would leave him alone for a while, but she sent someone to summon him that afternoon. In order to prevent any possible accidents, Fu Wang was tied up like a human dumpling. General Fu, it's been a while. Jiang Pingji was still dressed like a man in the camp. She looked like a handsome young man. Fu Wang was confused about her gender, but he snorted coldly. If you want to kill me, just do it. General, you know I won't kill you. Jiang Pingji smiled and said bluntly, I've often heard Captain Meng talk about you. He said that you're the best general in the Mengs. Now that you've fought with me, you live up to your reputation. If you didn't have the upper hand, who would be the prisoner now? General Fu Wang, you're so talented, but you're willing to work for the Mengs. Isn't it a waste? Chapter 799. Faced with Fu Wang's straightforward question, Jiang Pingji did not show the expected awkwardness. Instead, she snorted contemptuously. General Fu, who gave you the illusion that I don't dare to do it? Jiang Pingji got up from her seat and walked to Fu Wang. They were less than 5 feet apart. From an outsider's point of view, this distance was rather dangerous because Fu Wang could explode and violently break free to assassinate Jiang Pingji. Even though others knew that their lord was good at fighting, they still felt worried for her at such a distance. Undoubtedly, Jiang Pingji's answer was beyond Fu Wang's expectation. He looked surprised. What was even more surprising was that Jiang Pingji helped him to free himself. Fu Wang could not help but waver. A fine bird chooses a good tree to nest in. So what if I have 3 masters? Jiang Pingji threw away the hemp rope in her hand and freed Fu Wang. The Mengs are just incompetent villains. They put you in an important position on the surface, but they are always on guard. Don't you feel wronged working for such villains? Outsiders say that the Mengs are very good to you. I think you know the details better than anyone else. Fu Wang snorted and did not take her provocative words to heart. Jiang Pingji's words hit his sore spot. He had been suffering under the Mengs, but it was not enough for him to give up the Mengs and go to a new master. They seemed to like each other, but they had reached a tacit understanding in secret. If he went to a new master, would Fu Wang get the same attention? It was easy to talk, but it was another thing to do. He had seen this kind of recruitment trick many times. I am a rough man who doesn't have much education. I don't know how to use flowery words. If you have something to say, just say it. You don't have to beat around the bush. Fu Wang did not fall for the common trick of stepping on the Mengs and flattering himself. To put it bluntly, the Mengs were trash, but the person in front of him was a fairy. No matter how bad the Mengs were, he had given Fu Wang benefits. Fu Wang did not expect the Mengs to treat him as a confidant anyway. In his opinion, if Jiang Pingji really wanted to recruit him, she should show him the truth instead of talking nonsense. In Fu Wang's eyes, whether it was to trample on the Mengs or to flatter himself, it was all self-promotion and self-flattery. Who didn't know how to brag and talk big? Who didn't know how to do that? Meng Zhan often talked about his ancestor, Meng Jing, who was a few generations away, to increase his value and popularity. Fu Wang was a stubborn person. Ordinary methods of recruitment were useless in front of him. Some people could be conquered with ideals and blueprints, because these people paid more attention to the satisfaction of the spiritual level, and words could move them more than money. However, there were some people who were completely realistic. Benefits were only good if they could get their hands on them. There was no use talking. Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes and changed her strategy. General Fu is a straightforward person. Since that's the case, I won't beat around the bush. Jiang Pingji smiled at Fu Wang and said, General, you are now my prisoner. Not only you, but also your trusted subordinates. If the Mengs send someone to ransom the prisoners, even if they can leave, you can't. There are only 2 options for you. One is to kill yourself, and I will tell the public that you are loyal and unyielding. You only want to be loyal to the Mengs, and you won't change your mind. The other option is for you to surrender, and everything will go on as usual. Fu Wang was silent at first. He didn't expect Jiang Pingji to be more straightforward than he expected. When he realized it, his expression became gloomy. Governor of Liuzhou, do you mean to die or surrender? Not only that, but she also used Fu Wang's trusted subordinates as a threat? Jiang Pingji smiled helplessly and said, Didn't you say to be more straightforward? Do you understand what I'm saying? Wasn't what she said quite straightforward? Not to mention Fu Wang, even a deaf person could understand. Fu Wang didn't say anything. His dark eyes flashed with a strange light, as if he was calculating something. Have you thought about what you want to choose? Jiang Pingji was clear that Fu Wang was willing to appear in front of her alive, because he wanted to surrender. The reason why he was still stubborn was that he wanted to fight for some benefits for himself, such as protecting his trusted subordinates. Normally, almost no one would be at ease with a general who had just surrendered, let alone return the other party's military power to him. What if the general was pretending to surrender and suddenly stirring up trouble, while the new lord was not on guard? In order to prevent the surrendered general and his former subordinates from taking advantage of the opportunity to create trouble, the original organization would be broken up. On the surface, it seemed like they were putting the other party in an important position and giving him a lot of trust. But in reality, they were transferring their own people to the other party's command. Even more straightforward, they would directly deprive the surrendered general of his military power. It seemed like they were protecting the other party's military power, and they looked like they valued and trusted him. But in essence, they were promoting him. Fu Wang snorted coldly and was not prepared to express his stance. Jiang Pingji said, "I can subdue you once so naturally. I can defeat you a second time. General, you have to think carefully. It was already humiliating to be captured once, but if he was defeated by the same person a second time, it would be a great humiliation." Moreover, Jiang Pingji's style was overbearing. She would not give Fu Wang a second chance. He could either pledge allegiance to her and work for her, or he could die. Was she going to let Fu Wang live to seek refuge with the enemy and cause trouble for her? Fu Wang seemed to be provoked. He said, "How can there be an invincible winner in this world? Magistrate Liu, aren't you being too full of yourself? What's more, the other party was too arrogant." Fu Wang thought he was arrogant enough until he came into contact with Jiang Pingji. Only then did he realize that there was always a higher mountain. "I advise you to think about it again, lest you regret it for the rest of your life." Jiang Pingji still refused to show her conditions, so the operation to recruit Fu Wang could only be put on hold. When Fu Wang was taken away to recuperate, Jiang Pingji's expression darkened. She muttered, "I really want to cut him with a knife. He's not pleasing to the eye no matter how I look at him." Meng Han, who was beside her, said, "Why won't you say it directly?" The quality of the soldiers under Fu Wang was very good, but they were used to Fu Wang's leadership and had a tacit understanding with each other. If this group of soldiers was thrown to other generals to command, they might not even be able to exert half of their combat power. Jiang Pingji had decided to retain Fu Wang's military power from the beginning. This condition should be very attractive to Fu Wang. But why did his lord refuse to say it? Drag it out and grind down his arrogance. Jiang Pingji said calmly, as if this was the truth. In reality, she simply didn't like Fu Wang. Meng Han actually believed Jiang Pingji's reason and nodded in agreement. That's good too. Fu Wang gets whatever he wants in the Mengs. He's usually quite arrogant. In order to win him over, the Mengs rarely say no. Meng Han secretly shook his head. Let's put him aside for now. Maybe it can grind down his arrogance. His lord was different from the Mengs. It was unlikely that she would agree to Fu Wang's request. To give a ready-made example, his lord had a good relationship with Fengzhen, right? However, every time Fengzhen asked for something from her, she always rebuked him. If Fu Wang didn't change this bad habit after he surrendered, he would sooner or later have a conflict with his lord. Chapter 800. Other than Meng Han and the other generals who believed Jiang Pingji's words, the others exchanged meaningful glances. Even the newly joined Qi Kuang and Xiao Guang sensed something fishy, not to mention Yang Si and Fengzhen. You'll get used to it. That's the Lord's temperament. Fengzhen comforted the two newcomers with the attitude of an experienced person. Qi Kuang didn't like to talk because of his own reasons, but Xiao Guang was more open. Won't the Lord anger Fu Wang by doing this? The Lord wants to win people over, not offend them. If things get ugly between the two sides, how will it end in the future? Fengzhen smiled calmly and said, Zhen and Jingrong have analyzed Fu Wang in private. We all think that Fu Wang is different from ordinary people, and we can't judge him by the standards of ordinary people. Didn't Chong Ming realize that the other has never been upset about his failure, nor has he vented his anger on the Lord? What does this mean? It means that the previous failure was nothing to him. This person has long wanted to pledge allegiance to us, but the Lord refused to give him a ladder, so he couldn't get out of it. So he can only talk back. Once a general was beaten down from the clouds to the mud, no matter how good his mentality was, he wouldn't be unresponsive. Even if he didn't yell at them, he would at least give them a hateful look or an unapproachable attitude. What about Fu Wang? The other party calmly accepted his failure. His attitude towards Jiang Pingji, the culprit who caused his failure, was also indifferent. Fengzhen seriously analyzed this point and came to a conclusion. Fu Wang doesn't care about who he's loyal to. He only cares about what benefits the person he's loyal to can bring him. This benefit doesn't necessarily have to be gold or jewelry. What does Fu Wang care about the most now? It should be his trusted subordinates. Just wait, he'll compromise sooner or later. In other words, as long as Jiang Pengji still had these people in her hands, Fu Wang would sooner or later surrender. Xiao Guang said, if that's the case, even if Fu Wang surrenders, it'll just be on the surface. He might be resentful. Feng Zhen said confidently, if it's someone else, they'll naturally be resentful, but if it's Fu Wang, don't worry. As mentioned before, Fu Wang was a very realistic person. As long as there were benefits, he wouldn't care about trifles. To a certain extent, a straightforward guy like Fu Wang was very difficult to deal with, but if he could find a way, he would also be easy to deal with. Xiao Guang frowned. If Fu Wang was such a person, wouldn't he have no loyalty to speak of? He couldn't help but be puzzled. Could such a person really be used? How could he be sure that he wouldn't go to the Fourth Lord? To put it bluntly, this person was an ingrate. How could he be trusted with an important position? Xiao Guang said what was on his mind. Will such a disloyal person really not harm the Lord? If there was a better target, this person would also jump ship without hesitation. Feng Zhen, on the other hand, did not care. He said, the Lord does not need his loyalty. The Lord only needs him not to betray her. These words were very contradictory, and Xiao Guang was momentarily confused. Feng Zhen then explained, I remember that the Lord once said that no one in this world would truly be loyal to another person. The only reason why they would be loyal is because the price offered by others for betrayal is not high enough. These words sounded a little harsh, but after thinking about it carefully, they made sense. The Lord only needs Fu Wang to work for her and be used by her. She doesn't need him to be loyal to her. Loyalty was never something that could be achieved with words. It depended on the person's actions. For Jiang Pengji, her standards were very low. As long as they worked for her and performed their duties, it didn't matter whether they were loyal or not. She couldn't force him to be loyal to her after having his body. A melon that was forcefully picked would not be sweet. Xiao Guang was speechless. This was the first time he had heard of such a theory. After spending 2 days cleaning up the battlefield and treating the injured, Jiang Pengji planned to return to Wanzhou. Jiamen Pass should be the biggest test the Mengs set. Once we pass it, we will be safe. Not only had Jiang Pengji broken through Jiamen Pass with minimal losses, but she had also captured more than 10,000 soldiers and the Mengs' top general. It could be said that the Mengs had suffered a great loss this time, while Jiang Pengji had won a lot from this gamble. Not to mention a capable general like Fu Wang. Just the elite troops that Fu Wang had trained for several years were an immeasurable wealth. Feng Zhen and the others heaved a long sigh of relief. They had been under so much pressure that they couldn't sleep well. Especially Feng Zhen. Although he had gotten rid of the hanqi powder, his body was still damaged, and he couldn't sleep well. When they returned to Wanzhou, he would definitely take a vacation. Of course, but the Mengs have been our enemy for a long time. Lanting can't be careless. Lu Xie caught a cold a while ago, and was seriously ill. He had only gotten better in the past 2 days. By the time he recovered, his daughter would have taken Jiamen Pass, and wouldn't give him a chance to perform. Father, don't worry. I will be careful. As long as they entered the northern part of Dongqing, it would be the same as returning home. The Mengs would not be able to help. When Jiang Pengji led her troops through Jiamen Pass and marched north, the news of Jiamen Pass had spread throughout Dongqing. Fu Wang had a total of 25,000 soldiers, and they had the advantage of a dangerous pass. Without more than 50,000 soldiers and sufficient supplies, how could they break through the pass? Go home, wash up and sleep. It's much faster to daydream. Jiang Pengji only had 30,000 soldiers, and most of them were Lu Xi's. They didn't have much supplies. But the result? She had only sacrificed 3,000 soldiers to break through the Jiamen Pass and capture Fu Wang and his 10,000 elite soldiers. What kind of impressive battle record was this? When the news spread to all the forces in Dongqing, everyone turned their attention to the Mengs. The Mengs were the biggest losers in the battle. They had lost both their generals and their soldiers. How furious Meng Zhan would be, and how furious Prince Changsha would be. Just imagining it made them feel good. If they could see it with their own eyes, It would be a great show. It was 10 days after the battle at Jiamen Pass when Huang Song received the news. Lanting is really something. I can't believe the Mings suffered such a great loss. I'm so happy. Huang Song smiled as he entered the government office, holding the bamboo slip that recorded the battle. My lord, what happened? Everyone was confused. They didn't know what had happened to Huang Song that made him so happy. Huang Song handed the bamboo slip to Feng Ju and said, Huaijie, you'll know when you read it. Lanting is going to be famous. Feng Ju opened the battle report. There were only a few numbers written on it. After reading it, Feng Ju handed the report to Cheng Jing and the others. Cheng Jing had a plan after reading it. Everyone's attention was attracted by the content. Cheng Jing remained calm, because he saw something else. The chief of Wulong County in Haozhou is dead. His only bloodline and remnants are still in Lu Shi's hands. Haozhou was Huang Song's base, and Wulong County was also his territory. Huang Song's smile disappeared. That's right. But I'm afraid Lanting won't be easy to deal with. We don't know what her attitude is. It's not right to go to her. They still didn't know what Jiang Pingji's attitude was. Did she want to use the remnants of Wulong County to intervene in Haozhou? Or did she want to let them run their own course? Chapter 801. A few thoughts flashed through Huang Song's mind. When he thought of the final plan, he could not help but tremble. Would Jiang Pingji give up on the juicy meat that was about to reach her mouth and push it into his mouth instead? Thinking of this, Huang Song calmed down a little. He shook his head and said regretfully, the descendants of Wulong were saved by Lanting. It is only right for them to inherit Wulong County. Official appointments in Dongqing were complicated. When the royal family was still powerful, most of the appointments and dismissals of officials had to be approved by the emperor. However, with the gradual weakening of the royal family and the loss of monarchical power, the system gradually changed from the emperor's bestowal to the heirs. After the rescue of the emperor, this phenomenon would become more and more common. What did it mean that Jiang Pingji had the descendants of Wulong County in her hands? It meant that the descendants in her hands were the first heirs of Wulong County. Huang Song was just an outsider who coveted the power. If the descendants of Wulong County received Jiang Pingji's help, they could rightfully become the chief of Wulong County. At that time, if Huang Song wanted to touch Wulong County again, he would have to face Jiang Pingji. If Huang Song was afraid of fighting, afraid of his opponent, and did not want to face Jiang Pingji so soon, he could only choose to endure and watch as Jiang Pingji extended her hand into his territory. But how could he allow someone else to sleep next to his bed? If Jiang Pingji really did that, she and Huang Song could only maintain a superficial harmony. Sooner or later, they would break up because of this. Cheng Jing also understood Huang Song's worries. However, he looked further ahead and thought about it even further. My lord, how do you know that Lu Shi has no intention of cooperating if we don't send people to probe? Cheng Jing calmed himself down and said to Huang Song, Lu Shi's greatest enemy has never been Dongqing. Her threat comes from the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. As long as the 3 tribes of the northern borderline are not destroyed, she will not be able to rest in peace. Even an eagle needs to use its full strength to catch a rabbit, much less the northern borderline. When Huang Song understood the meaning behind Cheng Jing's painting, he suddenly felt enlightened. Why was he so muddle-headed? The 3 tribes of the northern borderline were not easy enemies. In order to deal with them, Jiang Pingji naturally had to go all out. At such a critical juncture, how could she have the extra energy to meddle in the affairs of other forces? As for lending soldiers to the descendants of the Wulong County to help them fight for their inheritance, that was even more ridiculous. If Jiang Pingji didn't have the energy to meddle in Wulong County's affairs, what should they do with it? Thinking of this, Huang Song's heart beat wildly. He hurriedly asked, Yumo, are you implying that Lanting will give up Wulong County for the sake of the bigger picture? If that's the case, we can indeed send someone to negotiate with Lanting. I think she would be willing to cooperate. Cheng Jing nodded and said, My lord is right. That's exactly what I meant. Feng Ju agreed. Considering the current situation, even if the lord doesn't send anyone to look for Lu Shi, she'll send someone to look for us after a while. In Wulong County, there was no other suitable candidate other than the Lord. If he could seize this opportunity to take down Wulong County, he would be one step closer to unifying the Haozhou province. However, in order to prevent any unforeseen events, I still need my lord to make a decision soon. Opportunities were fleeting. If Huang Song did not cherish it, who knew who would benefit from it? After some deliberation, the other strategists agreed with Cheng Jing and Feng Zhu's decision. Huang Song thought about it and accepted the two's suggestions. Just as Huang Song was overwhelmed with joy, a few people were so angry that they almost fainted. These people were none other than the emperor, Prince Changshu and his henchman Meng Zhan. When he received news of Fu Wang's defeat and capture, Prince Changshu flew into a rage and killed several officials and generals to vent his anger. For a moment, everyone was in a state of panic and fear. Some people even compared Prince Changshu to the late emperor, and came to the conclusion that the two of them were indeed biological brothers. They were the same as each other. In terms of brutality, they were practically the second emperor of Dongqing. Fortunately, none of these comments reached Prince Changshu's ears. Otherwise, he would have been even angrier. Because of his rage, he even changed his respectful attitude towards Meng Zhan. His attitude became a little more sarcastic. Mr. Meng strongly recommended Fu Wang to lead the army to battle in front of me. But what happened in the end? The so-called first general is just an undeserved title. He led tens of thousands of people to guard Gemin Pass, but he still lost it. It's a great shame and humiliation to lose to a young girl. Prince Changshu said it was Fu Wang's fault. But what he really meant was that Meng Zhan set him up. When Meng Zhan praised Fu Wang to the skies, Prince Changshu had high hopes for him. He didn't expect Fu Wang to lose so easily. How was he going to attack Lu Shi and his daughter? He was sending them to their deaths. Meng Zhan's face darkened. He was already in a bad mood. Now that Prince Changshu was angry at him, his mood fell to the bottom. He also sneered. Your Majesty, why are you so angry? Although Fu Wang lost, what did you lose? The soldiers led by Fu Wang all belonged to the Mengs. They had nothing to do with Prince Changshu. Even if they lost, it was the Mengs' loss. Why was Prince Changshu so angry? Could it be that this man really regarded the Mengs as his lackey, and the Mengs' power was Prince Changshu's? Prince Changshu almost died of anger after hearing Meng Zhan's question. But he was still rational. He didn't dare to fall out with Meng Zhan at this time. He put down his status as an emperor and comforted Meng Zhan. Although he was smiling apologetically, he felt an unprecedented hatred for Meng Zhan in his heart. These two men seemed to be on good terms, but they weren't on the same page. Elsewhere, the Su brothers also received the news of Jiang Pingji's great victory, but their reactions were completely different. Su Fei and Jiang Pingji did not have much of a relationship. When he received the news, he merely raised his eyebrows and analyzed the reason for her victory with his strategist. As for Su Bei, he and Jiang Pingji had called each other brothers during the alliance meeting. The two of them were still on good terms. Now that they had no conflict of interest and Jiang Pingji had won, Su Bei was naturally happy for her. But more importantly, to think that the Mengs would have such a day. How delightful! If not for his good upbringing, he would have pounded the table and laughed maniacally. The Mengs and Sus were secretly opposing each other. The conflict between the two had continued since the generation of their ancestors. The Sus were, of course, happy that the Mengs had suffered a great loss. They couldn't wait to throw a banquet and let the whole world know about it. Come, prepare a generous gift. Send someone to deliver it to Wanzhou. Tell them it's a gift from my sworn brother. Su Bei was rich and willful. Jiang Pingji had caused trouble for the Mengs, so he should at least express his gratitude. However, if this news reached the Mengs' ears, who knew how angry they would be? Apart from these few powers, the reactions of the other powers were varied. Some secretly sneered at Prince Changshu and the Mengs, but there were also those who were dismissive of Jiang Pingji. A woman was a woman after all. She had no backbone. It was just a small victory. And Lu Shi was so happy that he could fly to the heavens. Chapter 802. Lu Shi's influence was in Chongzhou. It was not convenient for him and Jiang Pingji to go there. Not long after they entered the north, Lu Shi parted ways with Jiang Pingji and brought his troops to Chongzhou. My lord, you don't have to worry about old master. In the north, apart from the Tsingyi army, there are no other forces that can threaten old master. Half a month had passed since the Battle of Jiamen Pass. During this time, Feng Zhen had eaten his fill and slept soundly. His days were comfortable. As a result, he had put on some weight recently. His skinny cheeks now looked a little meaty, and his complexion was rosy and healthy. Jiang Pingji said, I'm not worried about my father. On the surface, Feng Zhen nodded, but he still insisted on his own opinion. His lord had been separated from his father for many years. It was not easy for them to spend some time together. Now that they were going to be separated again, she would definitely be reluctant. Jiang Pingji could tell that Feng Zhen didn't mean what he said. She couldn't be bothered to argue with him. The streaming room was lively as usual. Even if Jiang Pingji rarely interacted with them, they could still entertain themselves. Little chicken stewed mushroom. This war has been going on for a long time. I remember that the streamer had just left for the Alliance conference, right before Chinese New Year last year. Now that she's back, it's almost summer. Now that I think about it, it's been half a year. Time really flies. In another half a month, my baby will be preparing for the college entrance exam. I've come to the live broadcast room to make a wish, hoping that the host will bless me, and I'll be invincible in the college entrance exam. Mushroom stewed little chicken. College entrance examination party. You're not thinking of fighting for 3 years to simulate 5 years of college entrance examination, yet you're still in the live stream room. You're so open-minded. Luo Luo peanut candy. As someone who's been here before, I can tell you that this live stream is magical. You can always make your wishes come true here. Jiang Pingji had been on the road for the past 2 months. Every day, she was on the road, and the content of her live stream was the same. The audience found it fresh at first, but after a long time, they were tired of it. Many old viewers chose to lurk and peek. Most of the bullet screen comments were new viewers. No one knew who started it, but Jiang Pingji's streaming room became even more powerful than the koi fish. Everyone spread the rumor that wishing for good luck. The audience's bullet screen content was getting further and further away from the main topic of the live broadcast, until an old audience member sent a question. Moyen Song Yuan, I'm only worried about one thing right now. Has the news that the host is a woman reached Wanzhou? This bullet screen had caused quite a few people to lurk around. Everyone's nerves could not help but tighten. The streamer had taken care of the people around her, but her subordinates far away in Wanzhou were still in the dark. When they suddenly received the news that their lord had changed from a young man in the prime of his life to a young lady, wouldn't they explode? In fact, this pot had already exploded. When the news that Jiang Pingji had become the Wanzhou magistrate spread to Wanzhou, everyone also received another major piece of news. The lord was actually a wife. To them, the impact of this news was no less than the earthquake in Shangjing. All of Wanzhou was in an uproar. Everyone pinched their arms and grimaced in pain. Only after confirming that they could feel the pain did they know that they were not having a nightmare. Suke was so shocked that he miscalculated the accounts. Looking at the messy accounts, he could only endure the throbbing pain in his temples and make another one. How can the Lord be a woman? From work to work, the same question lingered in his mind. Was he having a nightmare? Qiguan Rang went to Suke and asked him in private. You've been with the Lord the longest. Don't you have any suspicions? When Qiguan Rang received the news, his attitude was still relatively calm. He had a faint thought in his heart. As expected, faced with Qiguan Rang's questioning, Suke suddenly widened his eyes and said in an extremely aggrieved tone, How can I doubt it? How could a normal person suspect that the young man recognized by others was a young girl? Nowadays, cross-dressers were everywhere. The men of the aristocratic families wore flowery hairpins and powdered hair, and wore red and green clothes. The chances of Suke recognizing them were even lower. Your madam didn't leak any information? Qiguan Rang was flabbergasted. It was fine if others didn't recognize her. But Suke, who was part of Jiang Pingji's first batch of subordinates, was still kept in the dark. It was really inexcusable, not to mention that Suke's wife was their lord's personal maid. Qiguan Rang's question stumped Suke. He was stunned for a moment. He carefully recalled what Sun Mei had said, and his expression became more and more interesting. He stammered. I vaguely mentioned it, but how could a normal person think in this direction? Qiguan Rang secretly rolled his eyes. Who could he blame? If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame their lord for being too manly. They couldn't blame their subordinates for being blind. When Feng Jin received the news, he was in a good mood. How could he not be happy? He couldn't be too happy when he saw the dumbfounded expressions of his colleagues. For so many years, he had been guarding the secret that no one else knew. He had long been stifled. This happy mood lasted until he got off work and returned home. Wei Jingxian said, What happened to make Huayu so happy? Feng Jin took over Changsheng, who was getting heavier from Wei Jingxian's arms. He hugged his chubby daughter, and didn't even care that his daughter was tugging at his cheek. Jingxian, there are two pieces of great news, Feng Jin said with a smile. First, Lanting has been appointed as the governor of Wanzhou. Second, she has regained her identity as a woman. From now on, we don't have to worry about her accidentally exposing her identity and causing unrest. How can I not be happy? Lanting. Before Wei Jingxian could answer, the chubby daughter in her arms began to speak. She had only said 2 words when transparent saliva flowed from the corner of her mouth. Don't be rude. Don't call her by her name. Feng Jin took the handkerchief from his wife and gently wiped away the saliva for Changsheng. Lanting. Changsheng waited with her legs crossed. Her 2 black grape-like eyes sparkled as she babbled. Huayu. Changsheng was stubborn. The more Feng Jin opposed something, the more she liked to go against it. That's my lord. Feng Jin laughed and gave his daughter a slap on her butt. This girl was getting bolder. She even dared to call her father by his name. My lord. Changsheng proudly learned. Her speech was still incoherent. Often she could only say 2 words. That's right. Don't be rude when you see my lord in the future. Wei Jingxian was overjoyed to see the father and daughter talking like chickens talking to ducks. Changsheng didn't know what she was laughing at, but she also giggled happily. The atmosphere of the family of 3 was very good. The other single dogs were a little pitiful. For example, Zhang Ping. As a skilled craftsman, he spent most of his time in the woodworking workshop. He was obsessed with craftsmanship and had no distractions. When he received the news, Zhang Ping's brain seemed to have rusted. He almost couldn't wrap his head around it. Who did you say is a woman? For the whole day, Zhang Ping seemed to be sleepwalking. He couldn't remember what he did at all. When he returned home, the first thing he did was to rush to his neighbor's house. He forgot to mention that his neighbor was Wei Xiai. Zixiao, my lord is actually a woman. Thinking that the person who went up and down the mountain with him, looking for wells, digging ditches and building reservoirs was actually a woman, he was completely dumbfounded. What was wrong with this world? Was he still having nightmares? He thought that Wei Xi's reaction would be violent. He didn't expect him to just raise his eyebrows lightly and say, You know? Zhang Ping was strangely silent. It was the season where spring and winter intersected. The weather changed rapidly. Wei Xiai was naturally sick for a few days. During this period of illness, Wei Xiai stayed at home and couldn't go anywhere. Logically, he shouldn't have received the news so early. In other words, Wei Xiai had long known that Lu Shi was a woman. That was why his reaction was so calm. You. When did you know? A bold guess emerged in Zhang Ping's mind. Wei Xiai said lightly, I knew when Jishan's hot spring came. So early? Zhang Ping's face twitched. He gritted his teeth and said, You clearly knew that my lord is a woman. You still introduced me to her. Were you sincere? Wei Xi's expression changed. He started coughing hysterically. He looked like he didn't have long to live. After a while this guy started pretending to be dead. Zhang Ping was speechless. Chapter 803. Zhang Ping gritted his teeth. Why did he have such a friend who cheated his teammates? If the audience in the live streaming room saw this, they would probably be able to perfectly translate Zhang Ping's current state of mind. Hashtag every time I get cheated, I see my colleague pretending to be dead. Hashtag Wei Xiai. With your acting skills, it's such a waste not to work in the entertainment industry. Hashtag Zhang Ping looked at Wei Xiai, who was pretending to be dead, and spoke in an unfriendly tone. Wei Zixiao, you're still pretending? If you don't explain yourself today, I'll stay here and not leave. When dealing with a guy like Wei Ci, one must not be thin-skinned. One must be more shameless than him. He was thinking about how to get back at him when he saw Wei Ci lying motionless on the bed. His breathing was intermittent, and his chest rose and fell weakly. Wait, did Zixiao's illness really act up? Realizing this, Zhang Ping's anger disappeared. He quickly went forward and pushed Wei Ci, using his fingers to check his breathing. Upon checking, he was exhaling more than he was inhaling. Zhang Ping's heart sank. Zixiao! Zhang Ping immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Just as he was about to call for the doctor, the sickly Wei Ci quietly turned his body sideways with his back facing Zhang Ping. He quietly pulled the brocade blanket covering his body towards his chin. How did he still look like he was about to die? Zhang Ping was speechless. The anger that had just subsided rose again. This kid was becoming more and more capable. He actually pretended to be sick in front of him, and made him worry for nothing. Wei Zixiao, if you don't give me an explanation today, you and I will break off our friendship and never see each other again. Pretending to be sick? How could such a thing be faked? He did it on purpose this time. Who knew if it would be true next time? If the next time his illness really acted up and others thought he was acting, was this kid trying to get himself killed? Zhang Ping's tone was no longer calm. There was dignity in his anger. He was obviously serious. Wei Ci smiled. He knew he could not continue to tease Zhang Ping. It was a small matter if the other party was angry. If he really broke off their friendship, it would be a big deal. He sat up with difficulty. His face was pale as usual. His lips were an unhealthy greenish white. He looked sickly. I'm indeed sincere. Wei Ci shamelessly admitted it. He asked, will Shiheng blame me for saying this? Zhang Ping calmed down a little. He had nothing to say in response to Wei Ci's question. To be honest, Zhang Ping would definitely not blame Wei Ci. What's done can't be undone. What's the use of blaming you? Our Lord is not a kind person who can get off the ship smoothly. What's more, you already knew that she was a woman. After some consideration, you still chose to assist her. It can be seen that in your eyes, this lord is much better than ordinary feudal vassals. It's obvious that she's the wise ruler you've been searching for. I trust your eyes too. Zhang Ping and Wei Ci had known each other for many years. He was well aware of the latter's ambitions and aspirations. He was even more aware that Wei Ci's ideal ruler was too idealistic. He thought that Wei Ci would delay his official career until he was 30 years old. He did not expect that this guy would rush to the north in a hurry after receiving news of the earthquake in Shangjing. Out of worry for his friend, Zhang Ping escorted Wei Ci along the way. He was also puzzled along the way. What kind of person could make Wei Ci disregard his health and life, and drag Chen Ke's sick body to seek refuge with them? When he saw Jiang Pingji, Zhang Ping did not feel much at first. It was only after several interactions that he realized that Wei Ci had found the right person. The wise ruler that Wei Ci was looking for was not only an ambitious and ruthless person who could run amok in a chaotic world, but also someone who had a benevolent and loving heart. Zhang Ping sighed. He lifted this matter up high and gently put it down, letting Wei Ci off the hook. If you had known about this a long time ago, you would have at least revealed some information to me. Then I wouldn't be in such a sorry state today. Zhang Ping thought of his absent-minded state today and felt gloomy again. You didn't say anything because you were waiting for this day. You're happy to see others startled, aren't you? The feeling of knowing that no one else knew, and only he could not feel too good. I've really wronged Ci. I wanted to say it in the past, but the time was not right. I could only delay it again and again. Zhang Ping suddenly chuckled. If he believed one more word from Wei Ci, he would write his name backwards. Wei Ci had been sick for the past few days. He was not well informed about the outside world. Shiheng, you said that the Lord's secret has been spread to everyone. What's the attitude of the others? Other than Feng Jin, who was in the know, the others were kept in the dark. Hearing such explosive news for the first time, he didn't know if they could accept it. Zhang Ping thought about it and briefly described the reactions of the others. Most of them were surprised, and a few were frightened. As for the chaos that Wei Ci was worried about, there had been no signs of it so far. After listening, Wei Ci was relieved. Zhang Ping comforted him. Almost none of the people who serve the Lord are pedantic. Huayu, who has the strictest rules, reacted very calmly today. It seems that the Lord's gender cannot shake their loyalty. You don't have to worry about these people. But the people of Wanzhou, Jiang Pingji's subordinates, were carefully selected. It was impossible for them to betray her just because she was a woman. However, it was hard to say for the ordinary people. They were the group that was most easily fooled by public opinion. They could be used as weapons if they were not careful. Wei Ci said. After the Lord left, all parts of Wanzhou were hurriedly selecting female soldiers to fill the women's camp. I even asked storytellers to write stories to promote the merits of the women's camp. After half a year, the people have already accepted it. When the Lord becomes a woman, they will at most cherish it for a while. Zhang Ping listened and nodded repeatedly. The atmosphere in Wanzhou was indeed more open-minded than in other places. Speaking of this, when will you finish writing the story? Zhang Ping frowned, and could not help but urge him to update. Wei Ci's expression changed. His eyes drifted, and he said, "Isn't I still sick?" He knew Jiang Pingji's plan and knew when she planned to restore her identity as a daughter. In order to minimize the impact, Wei Ci had thought of many ways. Expanding the scale of the women's camp and selecting female soldiers in Wanzhou was one of the solutions. To be on the safe side, he also thought of another way, controlling public opinion with entertainment. Speaking of which, he had learned this method from Her Majesty. Compiling a story in the marketplace and having storytellers tell stories in tea houses and taverns, using catchy, easy-to-understand books to attract ordinary people. Through this method, he could achieve the effect of controlling public opinion. It was an era where entertainment was scarce. Only high-ranking officials and nobles had the right to enjoy singing and dancing activities. The entertainment life of the people was almost zero. Even activities such as performing on the streets had not become popular yet. Under such conditions, the power of Wei Ci's move was huge. It was comparable to a nuclear bomb. Every day, there were people who persevered in waiting, surrounding the tea houses and taverns so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. They eagerly waited for the content of the story to be serialized. Chapter 804. Zhang Ping sat next to Wei Ci and muttered, "I really don't understand why the people like the stories you write so much." Master Yuanjing's disciple was of such a high status, yet this fellow went to write stories from the streets. It was fine to write, but this fellow liked to whet people's appetites, squeezing out a little bit every day, making people's hearts itch. They wished they could lock Wei Ci in a small black room, give him a brush, ink, paper and inkstone, and urge him to fill the table with bamboo slips every day. If he did not fill up, he would not be given food. After all, it's for the people to hear. If it's too choppy, they won't understand at all. Rather than that, it's better to use plain words. It's impossible for the people to be interested in content they don't understand. Since it's written for them, it's natural to cater to their habits. It can barely be considered an appreciation for both refined and popular tastes. If the people can understand and listen, then it's considered a success. In the eyes of outsiders, Wei Ci's actions were not proper. In reality, the school of novels was also one of the 100 schools of thought, but it was criticized and looked down upon. There was a saying in an ancient book, "The school of novels originated from the officials. Street talk was created by hearsay." In other words, the school of novels recorded the people's street talk and reported it to the higher-ups, but it was seen as unfashionable. In his previous life, Wei Ci was also prejudiced against it, but Her Majesty strongly promoted the school of novels, and even supported a few famous scholars of the school. Her Majesty's actions provoked opposition and criticism from the imperial censor, but she did not care. Instead, she personally wrote a few books and used facts to slap the imperial censor in the face. Wei Ci thought about it carefully and realized her deep meaning. The school of novels was not necessarily unfashionable. Nowadays, the atmosphere was still rather open-minded. Some things could be done earlier, so there would be less resistance in the future. Hence, Wei Ci wrote a few short and medium-length novels under the pen name Layman Zaiki. He had the plot and the content. The plot was full of ups and downs, continuous and broken chapters that made others want to strangle him. It was not the Jiang dynasty now, where novels were still scarce. They were few in number, and the content was difficult. Ordinary people could not understand them at all. After Wei Ci considered the content and 3 views of the novel, he diligently got to work. The first story was about a female ghost who was wronged when she was alive. She was pitied by the gods and returned to the world in 3 days to avenge herself. The main character was a female. The second chapter was about a talented scholar and a beautiful lady. The talented scholar was just a bystander, while the beautiful lady was a strong man. The main character was a woman. The third chapter was an inspirational anti-Japanese war novel, based on Duke Su of the previous dynasty. It mixed the character of the lord, and the protagonist was a woman. Then, the commoners unanimously believed that Layman Zaiki was definitely a cute girl. Wei Ci. What was wrong? In short, under Wei Ci's promotion, a semi-official profession appeared in Wanzhou, a storyteller. Why was it a semi-official profession? This was because a storyteller could only have the right to tell stories in the taverns and tea houses in Wanzhou if they had the permission and stamp of the prefecture government. Not only could they receive tips from the people every day, but they could also receive a fixed salary from the prefecture government. As for those storytellers without a stamp, although they could also find a stall to make a living, the content of their stories could not involve Wei Ci's novels. As for those with improper views, inciting the people and fooling the world, they were even more forbidden. If they were caught, they would be fined. Since Wei Ci wanted to use entertainment to control public opinion, he naturally had to try to regulate this industry. At first, many storytellers were not willing, but Wei Ci's novels were very popular with the people. Not only did the men like to listen to them, but even the idle women who knitted their sweaters liked them. Ordinary storytellers were not qualified to tell these novels in Wanzhou. In order to make a living, the storytellers simply took the open road of the prefecture government. Needless to say, this policy of the prefecture government was very useful. Not only did it provide the storytellers with the latest and most popular novels, but it also provided a fixed salary. The storytellers no longer had to worry about how their families would eat if they did not receive any tips one day. However, Wei Ci was a single person after all. Writing novels was limited to a hobby outside of work. He could not spend too much effort. After thinking about it, he looked for Cheng Cheng. A novelist? Cheng Cheng frowned. What do you want a novelist to write about? Wei Ci's literary talent was not low. Cheng Cheng really could not figure out why he was going through all this trouble. Wei Ci had no choice but to explain his plan. Ever since Cheng Cheng came to Wanzhou, he had been working hard on movable type printing and engraving printing. He also had to organize a large number of books that needed to be printed. He was very busy. To put it bluntly, Cheng Cheng could be considered an older otaku. He did not work, and could not distinguish between the 5 grains of rice. He did not understand the deeper meaning behind Wei Ci's actions. Wei Ci had no choice but to tear this plan apart and explain it to Cheng Cheng in detail, hoping to get his support. As Wei Ci expected, Cheng Cheng did not agree at first, and was even quite angry. In Cheng Cheng's opinion, writing books was a very serious matter. It was to educate the people and pass down a legacy for thousands of years. How could it be used for amusement? As for the novelist, Cheng Cheng also thought that it was a low-class profession. The paper produced was not used to record the history of civilization, but was instead used to torment these things. Cheng Cheng was so angry with Wei Ci that his beard was about to fly off. Cheng Cheng scolded Wei Ci harshly. When his anger subsided and Wei Ci explained in detail, Cheng Cheng's attitude slowly softened. Is this really as important as you say? Cheng Cheng's heart wavered slightly. Wei Ci sighed and said, Mr. Cheng, do you think ordinary people can understand the teachings of Confucius and Mencius? Even if you let the storyteller read it all day long, the people would not understand it. If they can't understand it, they will naturally not be interested. Only those that truly fit their current situation can be accepted by them. In my opinion, promoting vernacular books to ordinary people is not blasphemy. Mr. Chung, please think carefully. Chung Cheng's rationale was biased towards Wei Si's words, but he still felt a little uncomfortable. As a last resort, Wei Si could only take Chung Chung to a tea house. There happened to be a story being told there, and the people below were fascinated by it. Chung Chung looked at it, and was silent for a while. Wei Si said, Mr. Chung talked to them about the teachings of Confucius and Mencius. Almost no one knows, but ask the people about the contents of the book. Even if they only heard it once, they could recite it as if it was their family's treasures. You can think that I'm being too unorthodox, but I still have to say this. Mr. Chung wants to pass on your family's collection of books and spiritual treasures to future generations. But if the people can't understand it, it can only benefit a few people, and not all future generations. The school of novels is indeed not popular, but times have changed. Mr. Chung, why don't you watch from the sidelines and wait for a while? Chung Chung felt a flash of inspiration in his mind, so fast that he almost couldn't catch it. Forget it. I'll find a few for you. Chung Chung looked anxious, and agreed to Wei Si's request. By the time everything was on the right track, it was already early summer. The provincial government received news that their lord was already at the border of Wanzhou, and would be back in half a month. Along with this news, Wei Si also heard about the great victory at Jiamen Pass, and the capture of Fu Wang. Wei Si raised his brush and paused. Ink dripped down, forming black dots. Chapter 805. What's wrong? You don't look too good. Is there something wrong with this Fu Wang? Su Ke rubbed his throbbing temples. Although his lord's transformation from a man to a woman did not cause a tsunami, there was still unrest in Wanzhou, especially among the landowning aristocrats of Shangyang County. The Feng family had maintained a state of silence, but the other aristocratic families were constantly making small moves. This was considered the best news in recent days. Su Ke wanted to share it with Wei Si, but he did not expect Wei Si's reaction to be a little strange. Su Ke was curious and asked casually. It was this question that pulled Wei Si into the quagmire of memories. Memories related to Fu Wang surfaced in his mind. I've heard of Fu Wang before. Wei Si adjusted his state of mind and restrained the shock in his heart, so as not to arouse Su Ke's further suspicion. Su Ke said, From the information we received, Fu Wang seems to be a valiant general working for the Meng family. I only hope that he's someone who knows his place. The lord was a woman, so it was inevitable that she would bring some trouble. At this time, the internal department had to be more united and harmonious, and there could not be any different voices. Recently, Su Ke and the others had been worrying about it. The situation in Fengyi County and Qingde County weren't too bad. The former was where Jiang Pingji had established her power, and her foundation was the most stable. The latter had been devastated by the Red Lotus Group, and didn't have any troublesome local bullies. Among the three counties in Wanzhou, Shangyang County had the least control. In order to completely unify the forces in Wanzhou, they could only think of ways to suppress the aristocratic families of Shangyang County, either by roping them in, alienating them, or making them unable to unite. As long as these people couldn't gather together and unite as one, these clowns wouldn't be able to do anything. At this time, Su Ke was most worried about internal unity. Wei Si had given him a reassuring pill, which made Su Ke feel more at ease. He said, Fu Wang first served Fu Yang, and then he defected to the Meng family. In just a few years, he became the Meng family's most trusted general, with his powerful martial strength. However, the Meng family was rather interesting. On one hand, they relied on Fu Wang, but on the other, they tried to rope him in and suppress him. It was quite a contradiction. With our Lord's magnanimity, she will definitely be able to take him in. As for Fu Wang's temperament, there's a little problem, but it's not a big deal. Hearing Wei Si's words, Su Ke instantly felt much more at ease. As long as he wasn't a troublemaker who didn't fit in with the group, he wasn't worried. Su Ke then asked, What's wrong with this person? After all, they would be new colleagues in the future. It would be easier to get to know them in advance. Wei Si lowered his eyes slightly, his thick and long eyelashes casting two exquisite shadows. He smiled and said, Fu Wang's biggest problem is that he is fickle. Su Ku exclaimed in surprise. What did she mean by capricious? He thought that only women could be described as fickle. If it was applied to a man, then it meant that the man. Su Ku frowned. You're saying that this person is disloyal? If he was disloyal, how could this be considered a harmless fault? He had a good impression of Fu Wang, and did not want him to be ostracized by Su Ku because of this. It can't be considered disloyal. Xiao Yu also knows that Fu Wang is a child raised by a pack of wolves. Wolves were far more straightforward than humans. They respected and supported the strong. This was an innate instinct. Once the master is weak and the subordinate is strong, he might not be convinced. Speaking of his previous life, Fu Wang's experience was quite interesting. It could be called a model of job hopping. Fu Wang was adopted by Fu Yang at first. He was Fu Yang's right-hand man, and half his son. The father-son relationship was very deep. Later, Fu Yang died of old injuries. Fu Wang brought Fu Yang's old subordinates to seek refuge with the Mengs. They still lived well. The main point was that the master of the Mengs died of malaria. The heir was a good-for-nothing. He failed miserably, and was finally abolished by Fu Wang. After Fu Wang took over the power of the Mengs, he accepted Prince Changshuo's recruitment, and became his most trusted general. However, Prince Changshuo was also a good-for-nothing. He was a blind man. Logically speaking, Prince Changshuo's camp was full of talents. There was Qiguan Rang in the literary field, and Fu Wang in the military field. Even if he could not become a powerful feudal lord, at least he would not die so tragically. However, this fellow had just gained a foothold, and was arrogant. He was surrounded by a group of sycophants. Not only did he alienate Qiguan Rang, but he also threw him into prison. He was guarded against Fu Wang, and even dreamed of taking away his military power. To his delight, Qiguan Rang ruthlessly killed his old master, and opened the city to welcome Her Majesty. As for Fu Wang, this fellow had sharp senses. He predicted danger ahead of time, and found an excuse to retreat with his troops. He sought refuge with the Nex family. Do you know who the Nex family is? The Nex family is the Su brothers from Zhe County. The younger brother Su Fei. Did everyone think that this was the end of the job hopping? Of course not. Fu Wang first sought refuge with Su Fei. However, Su Fei was a funny man. Not only did he use his military power, his governance was also a mess. He caused the wilderness to stretch for thousands of miles, and the people had no way to live. Even when Fu Wang joined with his troops, he was still unable to turn the tables on Su Bei. In the end, he still lost. After Su Fei lost, Fu Wang accepted Su Bei's recruitment. Speaking of this, there was a small incident that had to be mentioned. Su Bei's strategist Han Yu. Yes, he was Wei Si's senior apprentice brother in name, and one of Master Yuanjing's outstanding disciples. Han Yu said, Fu Wang is a violent person with few responsibilities. He is arrogant and lacks loyalty. He is a capricious villain, and cannot be used. If it wasn't for the fact that Su Bei lacked capable subordinates at that time, Fu Wang might have been killed. Because of this dispute, Fu Wang and Han Yu had a very bad relationship, and had frequent conflicts. Later, when Su Bei was defeated by Her Majesty, he used some tricks to recruit them. Han Yu still cared about his old master, and rarely gave advice to Her Majesty. Fu Wang, on the other hand, seemed to have been injected with chicken blood, and had a second spring. At that time, many people were waiting for Fu Wang to jump ship again. In the end, Fu Wang led a team of tigers and wolves. As for Han Yu, he was cautious by nature and did things meticulously. If it weren't for that incident, he would probably have died of old age. What incident? Han Yu's wife was from a prominent aristocratic family. Her family background was extremely high. However, Her Majesty had affected the fundamental interests of the aristocratic family, and had reduced their power over and over again. A few aristocratic families had secretly joined forces, and wanted to overthrow the palace. After all their efforts failed, Han Yu was implicated and committed suicide to escape punishment. Fu Wang was ordered to confiscate the property of the traitor. Han Yu was also implicated. He felt humiliated and wrote a 10,000-word confession letter, and committed suicide by swallowing gold. It had to be said that the dispute between Han Yu and Fu Wang had an inexplicable sense of déjà vu. Before Han Yu died, he secretly sent a letter to Wei Ci. Every word was written with blood and tears. Wei Ci had mixed feelings when he read it. After reading the whole letter, there was only one feeling: Han Yu died unjustly. When Han Yu was young, his family was involved in an unjust case. As a result, his family fell into disgrace. At the same time, his temperament changed drastically. After the establishment of the Jiang Kingdom, he was entrusted with the important task of revising the law. Chapter 806. This life was interesting. Not only did Han Yu's fate change, but he also avoided the tragedy of almost exterminating his family. Even Fu Wang entered the Lord's tent ahead of time. Wei Ci searched through Fu Wang's memories in his mind. He only remembered that he was a strong, burly, and energetic martial artist. It would have been better if Wei Ci hadn't mentioned it. Suka's brows furrowed tightly. According to what Zixiao said, Fu Wang is not a good person. I'm afraid he can't be put in an important position. Suka's influence on Fu Wang fell into the negatives. A person who could not guarantee his loyalty was a potential traitor. Wei Ci smiled and said, Xiao Yu's words are wrong. Not only will the Lord not let Fu Wang be idle, but she will put him in an important position. Suka couldn't help but say, but didn't Zixiao say that Fu Wang? He usually stayed silent, but once the Lord's power was weak, he would pounce and bite back. How could such an ingrate be used? Wei Ci's smile disappeared. His eyes were bright and full of confidence. He said, the Lord can subdue this wolf. Xiao Yu should be rest assured. Suka was speechless when he heard this. Wei Ci continued, don't be fooled by Fu Wang's rough personality. He is very meticulous, and is best at capturing the emotions of others. If Xiao Yu has a grudge against him, he will know. He might not say it on the surface, but he might have a knot in his heart. He is a newly surrendered general, and has only been with the Lord for a short time. He is not loyal. If he feels that he is being targeted, I'm afraid it will be more difficult to deal with him. Suka frowned. He understood Wei Ci's worries and could only say, I will take note of this. The new company still needed a period of probation to recruit people. In this era, Fu Wang was also a newcomer who needed to be observed. As an old man, Suka had the obligation to mediate internal conflicts. Even if they were not a family, at least they could not have unresolvable filth. Wei Ci knew the burden on Suka's shoulders. He patted him on the shoulder and comforted him. You will know when you meet him. Suka nodded. As the magistrate of Chongzhou, Lu Shi and Jiang Pingji did not take the same route to Wanzhou. The father and daughter separated halfway. When Jiang Pingji went to the alliance meeting, she only had a little more than 10,000. When she came back, she had nearly 20,000. The newly added soldiers were all elites. Yes, Fu Wang had surrendered. As for the details of his surrender, I won't go into too much detail. It can be summed up in a few sentences. What if a surrendered general doesn't surrender? Just a beating would do. What if a beating was still not enough? Beat him up again. Fu Wang boasted that his martial prowess was the best in the world, but he was captured by Jian Yan in his carelessness. When his injuries were more or less healed, he found out how he had knelt down. He had mistakenly ingested a large amount of sleeping grass. Fu Wang scratched his ears and cheeks, unable to figure out how he had mistakenly ingested sleeping grass, to the point of making a mistake on the battlefield. Sleeping grass did not grow anywhere. Most of them grew in the Cangzhou grasslands, and were rarely seen in other places. In other words, the origin of the sleeping grass that Fu Wang ate was very suspicious. Adhering to the principle that even if he were to die, he had to die knowing the truth. Fu Wang went to find out the truth. However, the truth was too cruel. After he found out, he was dumbfounded. Lust is like a knife above your head. Jiang Pingji mocked mercilessly. She used her body and spirit to attack Fu Wang. With this lesson, Fu Wang probably wouldn't dare to have any romantic affairs while marching in the army. In fact, if Fu Wang hadn't been too arrogant and believed that he would definitely win this round, he wouldn't have fallen for Huijuan's honey trap. Fu Wang felt that he needed some time alone. After a moment of silence, he asked Jiang Pengji, "What about the lady from that day?" Jiang Pengji snorted coldly. She felt that Fu Wang hadn't been tortured enough. He was still thinking about the beauty. "Why are you asking this?" Jiang Pengji glanced at Fu Wang coldly and nobly. It was one thing for this guy to pledge allegiance, but it was another for him to covet Hui Jun. In short, she wouldn't let Hui Jun continue to sacrifice herself. Her priority was to throw Fu Wang, the wolf, out of the sheep pen. Fu Wang said, "A day as husband and wife means 100 days of love." Jiang Pengji was speechless. Before she could react, the audience in the streaming room added fuel to the fire. The bullet screen was unusually meaningful. Mo Lingyin. A day as husband and wife means 100 days of love. Is the day in this pervert's words a verb or a noun? Late obsessive-compulsive disorder. Whether it's a verb or a noun, this wolf wants to covet this lady. I can't tolerate it. Continue to beat him. Juyueshunga. I absolutely can't tolerate it. Jiang Pengji took a deep breath. She looked at Fu Wang and called him by his surname and courtesy name. Fu Jingtu, that's my personal maid. In the aristocratic families, personal maids were mostly reserved concubines of their male masters. If there were no accidents, most of them would be taken in. Fu Wang was surprised for a moment. His expression became a little ugly. He immediately slapped his forehead and said, "My lord, you're not a woman?" If Jiang Pengji was a man, her words would be a warning to Fu Wang not to covet a woman who didn't belong to him. But his lord was a woman. Fu Wang was still very upright. Only men and women could have a future. Women and women had a pure relationship. Jiang Pengji retorted, "Can you beat me? Don't talk nonsense if you can't beat me." Fu Wang was speechless. If he still didn't understand, he wouldn't have lived until now. His lord was protecting Hui Jun. She didn't want him to have any further involvement with her. Fu Wang felt a tightness in his chest. There was an indescribable discomfort in his heart. He wanted nothing more than to vent his anger violently. What a coincidence! My lord, please give me some pointers. Fu Wang issued a challenge to Jiang Pengji. Yang Si and Feng Zhen, who had rushed over after hearing the news, looked helpless. Compared to their helplessness, the other soldiers seemed to be on steroids. They surrounded a huge field and watched the fight. Fighting easily made one's adrenaline soar. Not to mention that both parties were good at martial arts. Seeing that the fight between the two was getting more and more exciting, the situation was getting more and more intense. The surrounding soldiers lost their composure. One by one they shouted and cheered. Fu Wang's old subordinates naturally supported their general, but Jiang Pengji also had a group of die-hard fans. When the fight between the two reached its climax, the cheers and cheers of the soldiers resounded through the sky. They were so noisy that even the guards outside the tent could hear them. The atmosphere was extremely lively. To outsiders, Fu Wang and his lord were evenly matched. It was very intense. As the person involved, Fu Wang had an unspeakable bitterness. He could feel that his opponent hadn't used her full strength at all. She looked tired and sweaty, but she looked like she was at ease. The feeling of punching with all her strength, but hitting cotton was not a good one. Why didn't Jiang Pengji defeat Fu Wang? Instead, she was evenly matched with him. Firstly, Fu Wang's reputation among his old subordinates was too high. As long as Jiang Pengji fought to a draw with him, it would be enough to earn the favor of the surrendered soldiers. Secondly, by the same logic, if she easily won against Fu Wang, his old subordinates would definitely feel uncomfortable. They might even reject her. The current size was just right. She could publicize Jiang Pengji's reputation and make the surrendered soldiers accept her. At the same time, she could preserve Fu Wang's reputation. Fu Wang was carelessly punched twice in the face. There was blood at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were bruised. Hui Jun was embroidering children's shoes in a low-key manner in the tent. When she heard the thunderous cheers outside, she could not help but look around curiously. What happened outside? My lord and General Fu are fighting. They're fighting. Hui Jun rolled her eyes and asked, I heard that General Fu is brave and good at fighting. Is my lord injured? The person replied, My lord suffered some minor injuries, but it's not a big deal. Chapter 807. Am I hurt? Hui Jun was in a trance. When she came back to her senses, she felt a sharp pain on her fingertips. She gasped in pain. Looking down, she saw a bright red bead of blood on her fingertips. "You're slightly hurt? Where are you hurt?" Huijun forced herself to calm down. She put the embroidery needle and the half-finished shoes into the basket and was about to get up. "I'm not hurt much. I was just scratched. Just stay here and don't run around." Jiang Pingji came over at that moment. Her face was flushed, and her cheeks and neck were covered with hot sweat. She looked like she had just been fished out of the water. When she came, the female soldier who passed the news blushed. She bowed and retreated reluctantly. Jiang Pingji was puzzled. Huijun was stopped by Jiang Pingji when she got up. She could only sit back down, but she did not stop talking. "I heard you fight with that brute Fu Wang just now, didn't you? Where are you hurt?" If not for her introverted nature, she really wanted to crawl over and examine Jiang Pingji carefully. Although Fu Wang was a boorish man, he was not weak in martial arts. He was tall and burly like a small mountain. In comparison, her Langjun looked especially delicate and pretty. Two Langjuns together were not as strong as Fu Wang. How could Huijun not be worried? The weather was getting hotter. Jiang Pingji had already impatiently rolled up her sleeves and trousers. She still felt uncomfortable. She took the wet handkerchief from Huijun and wiped the sweat on her cheeks, neck and arms. Only then did she feel slightly better. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "Don't listen to other people's hearsay. Where are you hurt?" Her smile was too pure. Even others could be infected by her smile. They would even smile knowingly. That purity was not like a blank piece of paper. To be precise, it was the clarity of seeing through the affairs of the world. "You're still denying it?" Huijun looked carefully. Her sharp eyes noticed that Jiang Pingji's wrist was redder and swollen than usual. There were some finger marks. It was only because the sun was strong and her skin was tanned that it was not obvious. "Apply some medicine to reduce the swelling." Looking at Huijun, who turned to look for medicinal wine, Jiang Pingji did not know whether to laugh or cry, but she could only let her be. Jiang Pingji held her chin with one hand. While waiting, she glanced at the streaming room that she had ignored for a long time. Today's live broadcast room was still very lively. Jiang Pingji and Fu Wang fought with their bare fists. The audience expressed that the streaming that day was of high quality. It was a martial arts blockbuster no matter how it was edited. More importantly, they were watching from Jiang Pingji's point of view, so they had a sense of immersion. They faintly felt the thrill of transforming into a peerless master and beating up a child. What was even better was that after beating the little kid up, there was a gentle and virtuous lady by his side who was concerned about his well-being. The viewers in the live stream were extremely envious. Why didn't they have such a gentle and virtuous lady by their side? Not to mention someone as gentle as Huijun. Even if she only had 10% of her gentleness, it would be fine. Li Wushuang. The women around me can carry a 20-liter bucket of water and climb up and down. They are definitely tough women. Lao Siji Lianmeng. I'm so envious of the streamer. I watch the live stream every day. As a man, I want to raise the lesbian flag. Shui Monyan Yen. I feel like gender doesn't matter in the live broadcast room. As a senior Fujoshi, I really want to throw myself into the arms of romance. Drifting with the tide, little ding ding. Hee hee, whether it's romance or Yuri, my streamer can do it easily. Do you believe that? Love 36 stratagems. I believe, of course I believe. My streamer is the Lord. Do you understand that she's the main attacker? Jiang Pingji could not help but sigh silently as she watched the live stream move in a strange direction without looking back. Huijun helped her untie the cloth that was wrapped around her right hand. The ugly black mark was tightly attached to her palm and the back of her hand, like a birthmark. She sighed and said, "The palace's secret prescription doesn't work either. It's still the same." Every time Huijun saw the black mark on Jiang Pingji's right hand, she felt the urge to have goosebumps all over her body, but Langjun did not care at all. Jiang Pingji said, "This isn't a suntan. The whitening powder you used naturally won't work." The black mark was the level 9 loyalty talisman. As long as the mark was still there, it could always attract the woman from another dimension. Huijun sighed and carefully applied some medicinal wine to reduce swelling on Jiang Pingji's wrist. While applying the medicine, she said, "Langjun, don't bother with that boorish man. He's a rough and worthless rock. It won't hurt if he bumps into it." No matter how much a rock was thrown away, it would not hurt. But if a fine scratch was added to the unparalleled beauty of the world, it would be heartbreaking. Jiang Pingji agreed verbally and looked at Huijuan's lower abdomen. She said, "The conditions during the march were simple and crude. Fortunately, she was obedient." Huijuan's cheeks turned red. Her appetite had been very poor these few days. Everything she ate felt disgusting and nauseous. Langjun told her that she really had a child in her stomach. "How long has it been? How can you be sure?" Due to the rules of the women's camp, Jiang Pingji did not want to reveal that Huijun was pregnant, so she did not hire a doctor to take Huijuan's pulse. Huijun wholeheartedly agreed with Jiang Pingji's decision. Regardless of whether Huijun was a soldier of the women's camp or not, in the eyes of outsiders, Huijun was a female soldier of the women's camp. The women's camp was already very secular, and it was difficult for them to walk. If there was news that a woman in the military camp was pregnant, how could her reputation be maintained? Since she could not hire a doctor, Huijun could not be sure whether she was pregnant or not until Jiang Pingji gave her a definite answer. Jiang Pingji did not know how to take pulses, but her mental brain was strong, and she was especially sensitive to mental aura. There was another weak mental wave on Huijuan's body. This was a sign of a new life. In short, you still have to be careful. Don't tire yourself out on a daily basis. Although they did not rush on their journey, marching all day was tiring. For a pregnant woman who was still in her first month of pregnancy, it was enough to be fatal. Jiang Pingji could only let Huijun ride Little White. Even the saddle, reins, and stirrups on Little White's back were modified to make it as comfortable and light as possible. It looked a little gaudy. Fortunately, Little White's temperament was gentle. It did not make a fuss, and was as obedient as ever. Huijun pursed her lips shyly. A gentle smile hung on her face, as if she was enveloped in a holy light. Jiang Pingji could not help but smile knowingly when she saw it. She sincerely hoped that this would be the starting point for Huijuan's brand new future. She would not be entangled in the quagmire of the past. There were still 10 days before the slight heat. Jiang Pingji finally returned to the base camp that she had not seen for half a year. Half a year had passed. Chengde County, which had been ravaged by the flames of war and destruction, slowly regained its vitality. Young people who had escaped the flames of war returned one after another. Because they had caught the tail end of the spring plowing, the faces of the people there finally had a healthy blush and relaxed smile. Fengyi County was full of vitality. The wasteland that had been cultivated was already filled with crops. It was full of vitality. Farmer men and women plowed the fields while children played and frolicked. Chenggan District was a small district that had been tried out in the first year of the method of stationing the fields. Now it had taken on a new look. Farming could be seen everywhere. Chapter 808. Weixi's governance was indeed very good. The originally vague method of stationing land became a reality step by step under his arrangements. Based on the amount of land that had been reclaimed, if God gave them some face this autumn, not only would the food shortage in Wanzhou be completely solved, but there would also be enough surplus to support Jiang Pingji's army in 2 years of war. They would no longer have to scrimp on food and clothing, and the people would no longer have to starve to death. As for Shangyang County, one of the 3 counties in Wanzhou, there was now a new atmosphere. Su Ku and the others were also smart. While they restrained the local gentry in Shangyang County, they also thought of ways to win over the people and win their hearts. No matter how capable the gentry were, once they lost the power of public opinion, the right to speak, and the strength of their armed forces, they were just tigers without teeth. Feng Jin and the others fought back and forth with the local gentry in Shangyang County. Although they did not bleed or get hurt, they were tired and their heads hurt. What was gratifying was that Jiang Pingji had become the official magistrate of Wanzhou. Outsiders could no longer use unjustifiable as an excuse to attack her. So what if she was a woman? The Lord was still the Lord. She could fight anyone who disagreed with her. As for the victory at Jiamen Pass, The capture of the Ming's top general, Fu Wang, and his elite troops, that was just icing on the cake. Everything was going in a good direction. Jiang Pingji returned victorious. When they heard the news, the people watched the army enter the city with reverence, joy, and curiosity. Because Jiang Pingji was so close to the people, she often brought Jiang Ping and the others around, so the people were no strangers to her face. However, they still could not believe that such a handsome young man was a girl. So many beautiful women had their hearts set on her, but they did not expect her to be a girl. That was a big joke. On the day they entered the city, Jiang Pingji changed her clothes for the first time. She didn't wear a brown dress to deal with it. Instead, she wore a modified plain dress and combed her hair into a simple bun. Her thick black hair was like a black waterfall, parted in the middle, loosely covering her ears, and the rest of her hair was tied up in a bun at the back of her head. However, perhaps it was because of his attire, the once heroic young man looked a little more feminine now. The people were still stunned and rubbed their eyes, afraid that they were seeing things. They stared again and again, and they were sure that it was a woman. This time, the surrounding commoners were in an uproar as they discussed among themselves. Just as the soldier's jaw tightened, and he put on a look as if he was facing a formidable enemy, fearing that the people would riot, a light pink handkerchief with a strong fragrance tied to a sachet flew into Jiang Pingji's arms. She caught it in front of everyone's eyes. Jiang Pingji held the sachet in surprise. She tied the handkerchief around her mouth into a beautiful and delicate bow. She did not need to open the sachet to know that it was filled with spices, and not something to attack people. In other words, the owner of the sachet threw the sachet to express his love, and not because of the attack that the audience was worried about. Amused, she raised her head and looked in the direction the sachet came from. She met a pair of familiar eyes. Shang Guanwan glanced at her shyly, then covered her face, and moved away from the window on the second floor, under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Jiang Pingji laughed involuntarily and muttered to herself, "This girl," Li Yun, who was about 20 feet away from Jiang Pingji, expressed his hurt, and his heart was broken. He had expressed his feelings to Shang Guanwan before he left for the war. Why was the one who received the sachet and confessed his feelings after returning from the war? I feel wronged, I feel bitter, but I can't say it out loud. Li Yun's heart felt stifled. His handsome face drooped, like a rooster that had lost a fight. Shang Guanwan's action was like a command. All kinds of sachets, handkerchiefs, and fresh flowers swarmed over from the crowd. Cheers resounded through the sky. Fresh flowers lined the streets, the people's hearts. Jiang Pingji asked people to carefully keep the sachets, handkerchiefs, and other items. Among the crowd, Wei Xi heaved a long sigh of relief. "Thank you, Lady Wan, for your help." Even though he had made many preparations, Wei Xi was still worried that the people would not be able to accept his lord's gender. For this day, he had secretly asked Shang Guanwan to be his gunman. It was not right to say that she was his gunman. Even if Wei Xi did not look for Shang Guanwan, she had planned to throw the sachet at him, but she did not intend to be so high profile. How can Master Wei be so sure that once someone takes the lead, the people will jump with joy and cooperate? Shang Guanwan left quietly while the crowd was cheering. She happened to bump into Wei Xi, who was preparing to welcome Jiang Pingji. The people have a good impression of our lord, but most of them follow blindly. If no one takes the lead, the others will only respond in silence. Wei Xi said calmly, "Lady Wan has set a precedent. The people who have long been prepared, but dare not do anything will also be encouraged." He was afraid that one or two scumbags would sneak into the crowd, so he had asked the people guarding the city to be more vigilant. Fortunately, the result was good. The people knew how to repay kindness. The scenes that Wei Xi was worried about did not happen. He was relieved. Shang Guanwan sighed with a smile. Master Wei has planned a lot for Lanting. Hearing that, Wei Xi's earlobes were tainted with a suspicious red color, but Shang Guanwan did not notice. Even if she did, she would only think that it was because the weather was too hot. The king's worries and the minister's toil. The king's humiliation and the minister's death. As a minister, I should do my best and sacrifice my life for him. Wei Xi dealt with it calmly. Shangguan could not help but feel moved by his noble character, unquestionable integrity and loyalty. With the fragrance of horseshoes, she took off her armor and returned in brocade clothes. Amidst the cheers of the crowd, Jiang Pingji rode the tall and mighty little white through the main street. The soldiers on both sides of the road straightened their backs. Regardless of her appearance, just her vigorous spirit revealed the demeanor of a mighty leader. The cheers of the people grew louder and louder. Jiang Pingji was very popular, but the other generals who had won the war were not left out. Among them, Li Yin was the most popular. Unfortunately, there were thousands of sachets, but the one he wanted was not among them. #MyGrievance #welcome my lord. Everyone who could be there had arrived. Everyone had fully squeezed out their energy and physical strength. They had spared a few days just for this day. Jiang Pingji jumped off the horse and helped them up one by one. She said, "Thank you for your hard work." She did not spend much time fighting at the front lines. She was quite free when it came to making a fuss. Didn't you see that Feng Jin had put on 2 sizes? In comparison, there were a lot of things to do in Wanzhou. The few people who stayed behind were the ones who were suffering. With her words, everyone's heart was at ease. It was as if they had poured a bucket of ice water during the hottest days of the year. Their whole bodies felt refreshed. After settling down the soldiers, Jiang Pingji could finally return to the district headquarters that she was familiar with. Honestly, even war was not so tiring. Therefore, whether it was money or this life, she did not like such a tiring scene. After entering the district headquarters, everyone sat on the left and right sides of the room. The atmosphere was a little awkward. It was because they were not used to it. Their lord had changed her gender when she went out. Thinking of their lord's previous style, they could not bear to look at it. Chapter 809. To be honest, a boss who didn't give people time to prepare would definitely be scolded by his subordinates in the world of the streaming room. Su Ku and the others weren't ordinary people. They were very serious about the work they were responsible for. How could they be said to be unprepared? Jiang Pingji asked everyone. The development of Wanzhou was better than expected. This couldn't be separated from everyone's busy work. Thus she said, "You've all worked hard for the past 6 months. When the matters in Wanzhou are settled, I'll definitely let everyone relax for a few days." Except for a few ignorant newbies, the other old people had an expression that said, "You've all worked hard for the past 6 months. Rest days. Haha." Before saying this, spit out the 7 days of rest from last year's New Year. Not only were they complaining in their hearts, but the audience in the streaming room also helped to crusade against Jiang Pingji. She probably realized that what she said was a little fake, so she simply changed her method. Jiang Pingji's methods of rewarding people were nothing more than giving them bonuses, increasing their salaries, and giving them property deeds. When the newbies who didn't know what was going on saw it, they only felt that this lord was extremely generous and rich. In fact, haha, let's not talk about it. It's all tears. Realizing that everyone wasn't in high spirits, Jiang Pingji decisively changed the topic and asked about the farming situation in Wanzhou. Farming had always been thrown to Li Yin. However, since Wei Ci, the all-rounder, joined, the matter of farming was thrown to him. Fortunately, this guy had the ability to multitask and work in 2 hands. Otherwise, he would have collapsed from exhaustion. Wei Ci was in charge of farming, so the job of presentation was naturally handed over to him. Wei Ci stepped out of the ranks. He kept his gaze slightly downwards, not daring to look directly at her face. Others felt that their lord's face was too out of character, and felt uncomfortable looking at it too often. However, Wei Ci was afraid that the scene would bring back memories, so he became more and more immersed in the past. Her voice came from above his head. It wasn't hoarse, nor did it have any lingering tiredness. Instead, it was full of vigor and sonorous. In an instant, Wei Ci calmed his mind and returned to normal. His tone was calm as he truthfully reported the situation in the 3 counties and 9 districts of Wanzhou. He even made a rough estimate of the rice for the autumn harvest. Only old farmers who had farmed for many years could accumulate rich experience over the years and have a certain estimate of the harvest. It was evident how much effort Wei Ci had put into the matter of farming. Jiang Pingji said, Zixiao, you've worked hard. The words stabilize Wanzhou seemed light and airy, but they were actually extremely heavy. That was because this was not something that could be settled by destroying the Tsingyi army or the Red Lotus group. Compared to the main factor, whether it was the Tsingyi army or the Red Lotus group, they could only be classified as secondary factors. The foundation of stabilizing Wanzhou was to reduce the number of refugees. In other words, it was to give the refugees a way out, to let them return to the countryside and have a stable living space. The more refugees there were, the worse public security would be. When they gathered together, it was easy to cause unrest. If the Tsingyi army was annihilated, there would always be the White Shirt Army or the Yellow Shirt Army emerging. If the Red Lotus group was annihilated, there would be the Green Lotus group or the White Lotus group rising from the ashes. The original intention of the army farming law was not only to solve the food shortage, but also to reduce the number of refugees and stabilize the situation. Wei Xi did a great job in this aspect. Jiang Pingji could not even think of anyone who could do it better than him. It was not only the method of stationing land, but also the post-war compensation that was given to him previously. Wei Xi was also conscientiously doing it. These things could not be accomplished overnight, and the amount of time and energy needed was unimaginable to outsiders. For Wei Xi, the 6 words she said were the greatest affirmation and reward for him, far surpassing all glory. Wei Xi took the opportunity to restrain his emotions and maintain his composure. Others might not be able to see the flaws, but Jiang Pingji secretly frowned. After asking about the situation of farming, Jiang Pingji asked about Luoyue's military training and recruitment. Upon hearing the news, Luoyue stepped out of the ranks and gave a concise and comprehensive account of the key points, so that Jiang Pingji could have a general understanding. She said in surprise, the number of the female battalion has increased a lot. After all, the female battalion was still in existence that had been criticized. Even in a place like Wanzhou, there were not many women who were willing to endure hardships to be female soldiers. Most of the female soldiers who were recruited previously had gone through war and suffering. Each of them had their own bloody past. Jiang Pingji had also deliberately controlled the recruitment standards for the female battalion, so the number of female soldiers had not increased. She did not expect that in the 6 months that she had been away, the size of the female battalion had increased by 1/3. It was a rapid improvement. When it came to the female battalion, Jiang Pingji naturally had to ask a few questions. Jiang Nongqin was fully in charge of the female battalion. Luoyue only knew the general situation. He still had to ask her about the specific details. After not seeing her for half a year, Jiang Nongqin's skin was darker than before, but her brows were more resolute, like a wildflower in a thicket. Even though she had gone through hardships, she could still bloom proudly. Jiang Nongqin's requirements for the female battalion were far stricter than Jiang Pingji's. If she was satisfied, the development of the female battalion was obviously very good. As for the strange increase in the number of female battalion, this is due to Mr. Wei's efforts, Jiang Nongqin said. Jiang Pingji was stunned for a moment. She asked Wei Xi what he had done. Why did it affect the female battalion? After asking carefully, she found out that this fellow did not find it troublesome. He even tormented the storyteller and wrote some vernacular novels. It was this kind of vulgar thing that was unrefined in the eyes of others, but it actually made the people of Wanzhou obsessed. There were even many loyal listeners who believed in the characters written by Wei Xi. They all felt that it would be good if women could achieve success like the people in the novels. The content of the novels was too nonsensical and unrealistic. Uncultured. Wasn't Su Gong, who was awarded the title of Marquis in the previous dynasty, a woman who was born as a general? Wasn't there Lord Lu Shi, a woman who was born as a general? Going back further, during the chaotic times of the 16 Kingdoms, there were countless famous heroines. The characters in Wei Xi's novels all had archetypes. Under the influence of the novel, some people changed their prejudice against the female battalion. This also set a positive example for the reputation of the female battalion. Hearing this answer, not only was Jiang Pingji surprised, But the audience in the streaming room was also in an uproar. The pioneer of the vernacular novel, Wei Ci, you're going to heaven. My husband Yi Bushio. Beauty Ci should change his name. Just call him Lu Ci. Running Argon. God Lu Ci. Mr. Lu's son is called Zhou Shuren, okay? Even if he changes his name, it should be Wei Shuren. Xinzue. Am I the only one who is curious about the novel written by Beauty Ci? Is there any content that is like a veteran? My young valley master. Beauty Ci is such a reserved person. Why would he write that kind of indecent content? Even if he did write, it would be subtle and obscure. It's not as crude as you think. He directly wrote about reproduction. How vulgar and obscene. Some are departing Xianggu. Reserved? For example, a golden hairpin knocks on a jade pillow, fragrant sweat drenches silk clothes. Or, indulge in love during the day, make friends with you in my dreams at night. Or loose makeup, messy hairpins fall off. Not a single word is obscene, but the content is very obscene. Chapter 8:10. In a trance. Everyone had an illusion, as if there was a dirty train roaring past their ears. They really didn't know where the other party found so many poems with so many connotations. Or were the ancients also experienced in terms of sex? Shameless Jiqinchin. Crooked? Are you talking about demons and spirits? There's an experienced driver here. The situation is already out of control. The audience in the streaming room cheered for Wei Ci. They were curious about how such an ancient gentleman, who stood tall like an orchid and smiled like the bright moon in one's arms, would look like when he wrote erotic stories. They were so curious that they couldn't wait to encourage Jiang Pingji to read it now. They would definitely catch up. As the saying goes, amateurs watch the show, while experts see the artistry. Jiang Pingji could see the deeper meaning behind Wei Ci's move. In her opinion, simple and clear vernacular was an important part of opening the people's wisdom. She didn't expect Wei Ci to bring it up in such a form. That's good. I'm afraid it's been hard on you these days. She smiled and gave affirmation. Fulfilling one's duty is the duty of an official. There's nothing hard about it. Wei Ci still maintained a humble attitude, but he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. In the eyes of others, such vernacular novels were no different from saliva. But wasn't it also one of the channels for spreading words? The people couldn't understand it, let alone remember those awkward sentences. The simpler and more straightforward it was, the more it could be accepted by the people at the bottom. Everything had to be done step by step, steadily and surely. This was even more so when it came to opening the people's wisdom. Instead of forcefully instilling great principles into the people, it was better to hide the principles in stories and guide them to explore them. Of course, not every story could be spread randomly. Wei Ci strictly controlled this aspect, and even planned to gather a group of novelists to be in charge of this content. In order to expand his influence, he specially asked for Prime Minister Cheng's help. Now that he had the support of his lord, he was confident that he could do this better. As for those who criticized him behind his back for associating with unfashionable people, Wei Ci smiled mockingly. He couldn't be bothered. Jiang Pingji asked around, and had a general understanding of the situation in Wanzhou, but she looked around and her gaze fell on Cheng Yuan, who was seated in front of her. She asked, Gong Liao, is Mr. Cheng not here today? Cheng Yuan was Cheng Cheng's second legitimate son. His courtesy name was Gong Liao. He had been in Wanzhou for less than half a year, and his performance had been remarkable. Considering his age, he had done quite well. With a gentle and humble temperament, and a sincere and meticulous way of doing things, he would be popular no matter where he was. Cheng Yuan replied, My father caught a cold last night. He was checked by the doctor this morning, but his condition is very serious. He is still bedridden. There was a worried look on his face. It was obvious that Cheng Cheng was really sick. Jiang Pingji hurriedly asked, Mr. Cheng fell ill? What did the doctor say? Cheng Yuan said, The doctor said that my father was too worried and busy, and the cold caused the accumulated illness. Advantage, too busy? Jiang Pingji's expression froze, and she felt a little guilty. In the eyes of an outsider who didn't know the truth, Chung Chung must have fallen sick from exhaustion, because she exploited him too much. But Jiang Pingji really didn't cheat Chung Chung. How did you fall sick from exhaustion? She frowned. Chung Yuan realized that he had said something wrong, and hurriedly tried to remedy the situation. My father is getting on in years. Recently, he has been troubled by the annotations. My mother has tried to persuade him several times, but he refuses to rest. Chung Yuan's face was full of a helpless smile. He said, My father has a stubborn temperament. It is extremely difficult for others to shake his decision. Chung Chung fell ill not because Jiang Pingji exploited him too much, but because he overestimated his physical strength. He was busy and refused to rest. Yesterday, he was also busy until late at night. He took a cold shower because he was greedy for the cold, and he didn't pay attention when he slept. Then he fell ill. Jiang Pingji asked in surprise, Annotations? What annotations? Chung Yuan said, My father said that the annotations were inspired by Zixiao. The classics and historical collections are too obscure, and there is no unified sentence reading for each article. This causes the teacher to read sentences inconsistently when teaching students, causing them to misunderstand certain articles. My father has been thinking about how to mark simple and clear sentence reading, annotate the controversial articles, and lead the way for future generations. What was sentence reading? In ancient times, the place where the word stopped was called sentence or reading. Nowadays, the articles were all sentences. There were no so-called punctuation marks. The articles were stacked together. For example, if a web novel did not have any punctuation marks or paragraphs, what would that mean? Many sentences were passed from teacher to student. It was inevitable that there would be errors in the process of transmission. Some teachers even cherished their own knowledge and did not even bother to teach the students the correct sentence reading. It was really shocking. Chung Chung had been worrying about this matter for the past few days. Wei Xi's vernacular words gave him some inspiration. Hard-tongued classical Chinese would cause people to have different understandings of the same sentence, and thus lead to wrong interpretations. What about the most straightforward vernacular words? It could not be that there would be people who would chew on the words, take them out of context, and pass on the wrong understanding everywhere, right? If this annotation could be done well, the difficulty of students studying in the future would be greatly reduced, and many unnecessary misunderstandings would be avoided. However, there was no first place in literature, and no second place in martial arts. The same article could be interpreted differently by different people. Chung Chung alone was not qualified to annotate all the books in the world. Even if he worked hard to do it, would others admit it? This was a difficult problem, and it worried Chung Chung. Another difficult problem was sentence reading. He planned to use symbols with a certain meaning to break sentences, but sentence reading could not be decided by one person's opinion. The same sentence with different sentences had completely different meanings. Chung Chung still had a lot of things to worry about. Under so much pressure, would Chung Chung fall ill? Whether it was sentence reading or annotation, any one of them could cause the scholars in the world to criticize him. To put it bluntly, who was Chung Chung? What right did he have to call himself the world's teacher? Yes, if these two things were really done, Chung Chung would definitely leave his name in history. To put it bluntly, all the students who benefited from him would regard him as a half-teacher. Jiang Pingji saw the internal trouble at a glance. She said, This matter is indeed tricky. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to do it alone. Why don't you wait for the situation in the north of Dongqing to stabilize, before you publish the literature examination, and invite the scholars in the world to participate in the grand event? Chung Yuan sighed. He and Jiang Pingji had the same opinion, but his father was too stubborn and would not turn back until he hit a brick wall. Only when the Lord's power was stronger would Chung Cheng's words carry more weight, and he would encounter less resistance. He planned to persuade Chung Chung after his condition improved. This kind of thing was very likely to cause the world's scholars to criticize him. It was better to be cautious. By the time Jiang Pingji finished her work, the orange sun had gradually sunk into the horizon. Chapter 8:11. It was a celebration feast, but it was more like a welcoming feast. Today's main character wasn't Jiang Pingji, but the three newbies who had just joined the group. After Feng Jin and the others secretly observed them, they were quite satisfied with the other two, except for Fu Wang. Qi Kuang was originally a centurion under Yang Tao's command, but because of his inconvenient legs and ugly appearance, he had never been put in an important position. Because of these experiences, Qi Kuang had a quiet personality and didn't easily talk to people. He looked like a pragmatic person who didn't cause trouble. The forces in Wanzhou today needed people like him, who lived a lot and talked little. At least they wouldn't cause trouble and easily get involved with people. Xiao Guang had originally worked under Su Pei's command, but because his presence was weak and his background wasn't good, he hadn't been put in an important position for many years. Compared to Qi Kuang, Xiao Guang was quite talkative and tactful. No matter what others said, he could respond. Plus, he was recommended by Feng Zhen, so everyone had a good impression of Xiao Guang. Even if they didn't trust Xiao Guang, they had to trust Feng Zhen, right? The only one who didn't fit in was Fu Wang. He looked like a lone wolf that had left the group, and there was an indescribable arrogance in his eyes. It wasn't that they didn't want to interact with Fu Wang. It was because he was too cold and full of killing intent. The only thing missing was the words "strangers do not approach" written on his face. Among everyone present, the only one who had some friendship with Fu Wang and was naturally kind to him was Meng Han. "General Fu, it's so boring to drink alone. Let me toast you. Thank you for your advice back then." Meng Han sighed in his heart and turned to toast Fu Wang, who was sitting next to him. Fu Wang was 5 or 6 years younger than Meng Han, but his qualifications and achievements were far higher than Meng Han's. It was only right for the latter to be modest. "You and I are of the same generation, so there's no need to be modest." Fu Wang glanced sideways and saw the kind smile on Meng Han's face. The unhappiness in his heart mostly dissipated. He picked up the wine cup on his table, and the two of them downed the wine in one gulp. Meng Han wanted to sound out Fu Wang. It wasn't that he was gossipy, but he wanted to use this opportunity to help Fu Wang integrate into Wanzhou as soon as possible. He smiled and said, "Since General Fu has said so, I won't be modest. If we can be friends of the same generation, of course, I'd be more than happy." Fu Wang did not utter a word and poured himself a cup of wine. Meng Han asked, "You didn't look worried just now. Did you encounter something difficult?" Fu Wang said with slight disappointment, "Since it's a celebratory banquet, there's no singing and dancing to liven things up, and there's no music to warm things up. It's really boring." Hearing this, Meng Han smiled awkwardly but politely. Singing and dancing? His lord was too stingy. She didn't pay for dancers and singers at all. She wanted to see the content of the performances at the banquet? "All right, I'll go prepare it myself." Thinking of his lord's conduct, Meng Han felt powerless. He couldn't help but lower his voice and complain, "I'm afraid it's impossible for General Fu to watch singing and dancing." Fu Wang raised his eyebrows, his gaze becoming more serious and inquisitive. "What do you mean? My lord always says that she doesn't feed idlers. So why would she be willing to spend so much money on singers and dancers? If General wishes to see a song and dance, I'm afraid that you can only watch a group of men playing with their throats, or Han Mei brandishing his spear, or Dian Yin brandishing his axe. Zixiao's painting skills are not bad, and Huayu's zither skills are outstanding. Fu Wang." If Fu Wang's inner voice could be translated into subtitles, it would probably be, he felt that he had entered an abnormal group of crazy demons. She could even skip singing and dancing, and she even asked her subordinates to prepare their own entertainment programs. Such a lord would be doomed sooner or later. That. Fu Wang suddenly remembered that Meng Han had been with Jiang Pingji for a long time, dating back to when Jiang Pingji was still an ordinary scholar. His attitude changed because of this, and he became closer to Meng Han. "There's something I want to ask you in private." Fu Wang approached Meng Han and lowered his voice. The surroundings were filled with the noise of drinking, and laughter. His and Meng Han's movements were inconspicuous. Meng Han suddenly became more spirited. He said, "General, you don't have to be so polite. As long as it's something I know, I won't hide it from you." Fu Wang thought about it and asked a little embarrassedly, "Do you know how many maids the Lord has?" Meng Hun. He had been mysterious for so long just to ask such a question? Meng Hun coughed lightly and thought carefully. He was afraid that Fu Wang had taken a fancy to the maids around his lord. If that was the case, it would be difficult. Thus, he said with some uncertainty, "I remember there are only 3, right?" "Which 3? Fu Wang perked up and his eyes lit up. Meng Hun's heart sank. He hesitated and said, "One is Lady Nongqin. Look, she's the one at the banquet. One is Xiaoyu's wife Xuanmei. However, Xiaoyu's wife is still in Hejing County and hasn't come. The other is Lady Takshu. She's the steward of the Lord's inner court." Did Fu Wang take a fancy to one of them? "There's no Lady Hui?" Fu Wang almost couldn't wrap his head around it. Wasn't Hui Jun the Lord's maid? Meng Hun was surprised. "Lady Hui? I'm not sure about Lady Hui's situation. She only appeared by the Lord's side after the imperial city of Qinzhou. It's hard to say whether she's the Lord's maid or not. But looking at the Lord's attitude, I'm afraid he values Lady Hui a lot." Huijuan's existence had always been mysterious. Meng Hun had known of her existence a long time ago, but he had only really met her after the rescue of the emperor. He used this to send a hint to Fu Wang. As long as the Lord valued someone, the subordinates should not have the slightest bit of covetousness. Even if their lord was female, this rule would still apply. Fu Wang asked, "Do you know where Lady Hui is now?" Meng Hun felt the hairs on his back stand up. He laughed dryly and probed, "General, have you taken a fancy to Lady Hui?" Fu Wang said calmly, "Of course not. I'm just curious." Meng Hun secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't want Fu Wang to fall because of a woman. No matter how he looked at it, if he had a conflict with the Lord because of Lady Hui, he would be looking for trouble for himself. At the banquet, Wei Xi seemed to be chatting and laughing with Feng Jin, but his attention was on Jiang Pingji. Feng Jin saw that he was absent-minded and followed Wei Xi's line of sight. He suddenly raised his eyebrows, and there was some interest in his eyes. "Zixiao, why are you looking at the Lord like that?" Feng Jin's sudden question scared Wei Xi so much that his fingers paused. The wooden chopsticks in his hand hit the edge of the bowl, making a crisp sound. "Why you scared me?" Wei Xi put down the wooden chopsticks with a normal expression and said, "I'm just curious." "Curious about what?" Feng Jin was puzzled. "The Lord has been staring at General Fu since just now. Her gaze is a little unfriendly. I don't know what General Fu and Captain Meng said to make the Lord so unhappy." Wei Xi said gently, "These two are also slow. They didn't even notice that the Lord has already noticed them." Feng Jin's gaze fell on Jiang Pingji, and then followed her line of sight to Fu Wang and Meng Hun. The main hall of the banquet was not small. No matter how much Feng Jin concentrated, he couldn't hear the conversation between Meng Hun and the others. How do you know that the Lord heard what they said? Maybe she felt that the two of them were putting their arms around each other's shoulders, so she used her gaze to warn them? Wei Xi smiled and said, "The Lord has excellent hearing." They thought that they were speaking softly, but the Lord definitely heard them. Chapter 8:12. Feng Jin was strangely silent for a moment and asked, "How good is it?" Wei Xi said with a smile, "Let General Fu and Captain Ming whisper at the door. My lord can hear them clearly." Feng Jin was speechless. At that moment, Feng Jin looked at Meng Hun and Wei Xi with some sympathy. They thought they were whispering and no one else heard them. But they didn't know that their lord heard them all. Should we remind them? If we let them talk like that, it's hard to guarantee that they won't say something wrong after drinking. If something happened at the celebration banquet, they might be used by someone with ulterior motives. Wei Xi also lowered his voice. "Of course, leave this matter to me." Feng Jin inadvertently looked up and happened to meet Jiang Pingji's gaze. He was so scared that he almost threw the wine cup in his hand. According to Wei Xi, the Lord had excellent hearing. She could hear Meng Hun and Wei Xi's whispering, so naturally, she could also hear his conversation with Wei Xi. He was about to remind Wei Xi not to be impulsive, but before he could speak, he received a warning look from Jiang Pingji. Feng Jin silently swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. It's better for you to die than for me. In such a short time, Feng Jin sold Wei Xi out without hesitation. Wei Xi didn't understand. He stepped forward and said, "My lord, I sent people to build the Green Jade House last year. Now there are more than 10 acres of farmland. 2 days ago, the tenant farmers in charge of farming sent the ripe fruits to the district headquarters. It's being frozen in the well now. Why don't we take it and have a taste?" Jiang Pingji thought for a while before she remembered what Wei Xi was referring to. The Green Jade House was commonly known as watermelon. Last year, she planted a small half-acre of watermelon in the district headquarters garden. The yield was not much, only enough for her and her subordinates to have a taste. Later, she felt that watermelon could be grown by the people and made money, so she planned to let some experienced tenant farmers take care of it. Unexpectedly, it was successfully planted this year. Calculating the time, it was indeed the season for watermelons to ripen. After Jiang Pingji agreed, Wei Xi asked the kitchen chef to fetch the watermelon from the well. He opened the watermelon with a knife, and the bright red flesh gave off a cold air. Watermelons were either cut into slices or split in half and eaten with a spoon. But these two ways of eating were too vulgar. Wei Xi could not imagine a gentleman like Feng Jin holding half a round watermelon in his left hand and holding a spoon in his right, scooping out a big piece of watermelon pulp and stuffing it into his mouth. That scene was too beautiful, he could not bear to imagine it. Thus, he instructed the chef to cut off the skin of the melon and cut the pulp into small pieces, placing them on a small plate. It was convenient to eat, and also very pleasing to the eye. More than 10 mu of watermelons have been planted. What's the yield of each mu? Watermelons could only be found in small countries in the western region. If Gu Xian had not brought a few live seedlings to Jiang Pingji would not have been able to eat them. Apart from the few newcomers, the rest of the people present had only eaten a little last year. Wei Xi reported, "1 mu has about 5,000 caddies." 5,000 jin? When everyone heard this number, they were speechless. This production was really high. Fu Wang ate a small piece. The sweet melon flesh brought with it an ice-cold chill, making him feel refreshed. Why is it all water? Looking at the pieces of melon flesh, he thought that it was like an ordinary fruit. Who knew that when he bit into it, it was all juice? But the fruit was quite delicious, and he finished a plate in a short while. Watermelons are like this. They quench thirst and relieve heat in summer. Jiang Pingji was quite satisfied with the yield of watermelons per mu. With the current agricultural methods, it was considered a bumper harvest to be able to produce 5,000 caddies per mu. If she turned on the live stream, the audience would agree with her idea. In the world of the live stream audience, the yield per mu was about 7,000 to 10,000, depending on the type of watermelon. Jiang Pingji asked again. Tenant farmers have been planting for a year, so they should have some experience. If we plant the watermelons for the people, can they grow them? Watermelons had a high yield, were delicious and were rare. There should be a market for them. If the people were to plant some, they would definitely benefit a lot. The premise for large-scale planting was that this thing could not be pretentious. Otherwise, if the people responded to the call to plant watermelons, but because of their lack of experience, the watermelons would all die, wouldn't it be a huge loss? Wei Xi responded smoothly, as if he had already expected this question from Jiang Pingji. He replied seriously, "Tenant farmers have been taking care of it for a year, so they have some experience. This thing likes to be dry and not wet. It likes sandy soil more than clay. If the weather is cloudy and the fields are too wet, the watermelon seedlings are prone to diseases. It might even affect the yield when it matures." Jiang Pingji ate the watermelon while thinking, "Let's talk about this in detail tomorrow." She already had a general plan in mind. She planned to discuss it in detail with a few subordinates the next day and sort out a plan. It was a celebratory feast, so it was not suitable to talk about such serious matters. Because Jiang Pingji did not like noise, the crowd did not play for too long, so the celebratory feast ended earlier. Jiang Pingji asked someone to prepare hot soup to wash away the sticky sweat and smell of alcohol on her body. When she entered the backyard, She saw Huijun sitting in the room embroidering. There were 2 round watermelons on a plate not far away. She frowned. She did not remember asking someone to send watermelons to Huijun. Although this thing had the effect of urinating and detoxifying, it was cold in nature. Pregnant women could eat it, but not too much. Who sent this? Jiang Pingji asked. When Huijun saw Jiang Pingji coming over, she stood up and bowed. Then she asked doubtfully, "Didn't you send this?" Jiang Pingji did not comment. She called the servants over and found out who had sent it. After the celebratory feast ended, she gave everyone an extra 2 watermelons. There were too few watermelons at the feast, so they could not eat to their heart's content. The 2 watermelons on Huijun's side were a gift from Fu Wang. He really knows how to present Buddha with borrowed flowers. After muttering a few words, she turned her head and told Huijun not to be greedy and eat too much. The doctor came to take a look today. What did he say? Huijun said. The doctor said that the fetus is not very stable. It should be because of the continuous days of marching. He will be fine after resting for a while. Her body's foundation was good. She would be able to stabilize after resting for a while. Takshu has made arrangements for the inner court. You just need to take care of the fetus, Jiang Pingji said. Embroidery hurts the eyes. Don't do this at night in the future. Huijun smiled faintly. You are more meticulous than me as a mother. Jiang Pingji said. After all, you are the child's future godmother. As the mother, you are not attentive. As the godmother, I have to be more attentive. Regardless of whether it was in her previous life or this one, she had always been in awe of new life. After all, new life was the future. The night was dark, but all the houses were still brightly lit. No one was asleep. Why isn't Changxing asleep yet? Feng Jin had a lot to say to his wife, but the little ancestor, Changxing, stayed in their room and refused to move. Changxing's stomach hurts. Mother, give it a rub. Changxing lay in Wei Jingxian's arms. She propped up her round little belly. Wei Jingxian's hand rubbed her belly with a moderate amount of force. You're already so big. Can't you restrain yourself from eating less? Feng Jin sighed. His daughter was young, but her weight was not small. From afar she looked like a ball. Although a chubby child was cute, he always felt that Changxing was too fat. Chapter 8:13. No matter how likable his daughter was, she was still a naughty child. Feng Jin simply threw the child to the wet nurse and let Changxing go back to her room to sleep. Changxing's diet has to be more restricted. If she gets any fatter, she won't be able to watch. Feng Jin felt that he should be more ruthless. Which woman of the Feng clan didn't go through such a life? If he couldn't indulge her, he would be harming her. After a period of time, I will write another letter to Big Brother and ask him to help me find a female teacher with a better temperament. Changxing is still young, but enlightenment should be put on the agenda. In the end, he still doted on his daughter. Feng Jin felt that the teacher's temper was far more important than his talent. A teacher for a day, a father for a lifetime. The teacher was a teacher. As a student, Changxing could not disobey him. However, Changxing had been spoiled by the couple since she was young. She had a bad temper. If she was punished by the teacher for being mischievous, their hearts would ache. Choose someone with a good temper, or at least a higher tolerance level. At the mention of enlightenment and rules, Wei Jingxian's face changed. She hesitated and said, but Changxing is still young. Feng Jin's heart wavered. In the end, he gritted his teeth and said, just because she's young doesn't mean she's immature. You and I can't indulge her. In the era where 13 or 14 years old could start a family and start a career, Changxing was already 2 years old. Indeed, she was not considered young. If it was in the Feng family, when a child could speak fluently, he would be initiated to read and learn the rules. How could he be as leisurely as Changxing? Look at her daily eating frequency. If she didn't gain so much weight, it would be a waste of the fat on her body. Moreover, the earlier Changxing becomes sensible, the more leisurely you will be. He was a man with a wife and a daughter. Why was he living like Su Ku, alone in an empty room every night? No matter how unwilling Wei Jingxian was, she could not object. Feng Jin doted on his daughter. How could he harm Changxing? Parents love their children and have far-reaching plans. But Feng Jin had to ask Changxing if she was willing or not. Nanny. Changxing was wronged as she was carried back to her courtyard by the wet nurse. She took off her clothes and laid on the couch. The wet nurse helped her cover the brocade quilt. What's wrong, madam? The wet nurse was a gentle and dignified woman. Although she was called a wet nurse, in fact, Changxing grew up drinking Wei Jingxian's breast milk. This wet nurse was only responsible for taking care of Changxing's daily life. Does your stomach still feel uncomfortable? Her parents indulged her, so Changxing could eat whatever she wanted every day. She had more than 5 or 6 meals a day, and snacks before bed were a must. Father. Changxing pouted, feeling wronged. You don't want Changxing anymore? The wet nurse was startled. With a panicked expression on her face, she hurriedly said, Eldest lady, you can't say such things carelessly. Laoi loved Yangzi the most. He held her in his hands, afraid that she would fall. He held her in his mouth, afraid that she would melt. He truly placed her at the top of his heart. Auntie, you can't say these words again. Although a child's words carried no harm, a child's unintentional words could cause the listener to take it to heart and alienate the father-daughter relationship. Changxing blinked her eyes and mumbled a response. Then she turned around and did whatever was most comfortable. Nanny! Changxing closed her eyes and pretended to doze, but she still could not fall asleep. I miss Wei Susu, the wet nurse said with a troubled expression. If it's already tonight, I'm afraid Mr. Wei has already fallen asleep. The Wei Susu that Changxing mentioned was none other than Wei Ci, who was a street away from Feng Jin. Ignoring the wet nurse's words, Changxing clumsily climbed up from the bed, hugged her clothes, and wanted to go out. Look for Wei Susu. The wet nurse was speechless. Although Changxing was young, she had an unusually bad temper. It was not that she had a bad temper, but she was rather stubborn. She would do whatever she wanted to do on a whim, and she would throw a tantrum if anyone tried to stop her. Feng Jin and his wife pampered their only daughter, and the servants complained incessantly. The wet nurse could only find someone to ask for advice from Feng Jin and his wife. Once the eldest lady's stubborn temper flared up, no one could suppress it. Feng Jin, who was enjoying the world of the two of them tenderly and sweetly with his wife. What a fraud, my daughter! Let her look for her, and send someone to watch over her. Please Zixiao take Changxing in for one night, and bring her back tomorrow. Feng Jin could not get angry even if he wanted to, but he could not let his daughter run out of the residence alone. So he could only send someone to escort her. He had a good personal relationship with Wei Ci, and would occasionally send Wei Ci an invitation to be a guest at his house. Perhaps it was fate, but Changxing was exceptionally fond of this beautiful uncle. Later, Feng Jin understood that his daughter was greedy for beauty, and had taken a fancy to Wei Ci's face. At such a young age, she was so obsessed with looks. Wei Jingxian held back her laughter and said, It's so late, will Changxing disturb him if she goes over? Feng Jin secretly rolled his eyes. Wei Ci was a loner, single, and did not have a nightlife. What was there to disturb about? To be able to send the little ancestor out, he felt that his ears were at peace. Thus, Wei Ci was rewarded with a bun that knocked on the door in the middle of the night. Changxing. Wei Ci had not gone to sleep yet, and was still working late at night. He vaguely heard a knock on the door, and the doorkeeper told him that there was a visitor. He did not expect that the other party was actually Changxing. According to the wet nurse who served Changxing, this girl ran out on her own. Girl, did you quarrel with your father again? Wei Ci smiled as he picked up the heavy Changxing, and said to the women who served Changxing, Go back and tell Huayu that Changxing will stay here tonight. Ask him to send someone over to pick her up tomorrow. There were no other women in Wei Ci's residence, except for the kitchen maids and the servants who washed the clothes. Occasionally, Changxing came to stay at his place, and he would chase away all the female servants who served Changxing. It would be bad for his reputation if these women stayed in his residence. Changxing pursed her lips and wrapped her arms around Wei Ci's neck. She said with a serious face, Father wants a younger brother, not Changxing. Wei Ci held back his laughter. It turned out that she felt abandoned and felt insecure. He comforted her. How can that be? 10 younger brothers can't compare to Chongqing's cuteness. Chongqing was still a little angry. Although she was young, she was quite sensitive to the emotions of others. For example, she instinctively knew that Jiang Pingji belonged to the kind of thighs that she had to cling onto tightly. If her father was fierce to her, it would be right to cling onto Jiang Pingji's thighs. Another example was that she had a natural closeness to Wei Ci, because she felt that Wei Ci liked her very much. Because of this, Wei Ci was a completely harmless existence to her. But father still wants a younger brother. The immortal person heaved a deep sigh, and obediently sat next to Wei Ci. His pair of black grape-like eyes rolled around randomly, looking at this and that. Although she was sitting, her heart had long since flown to an unknown place, and her little butt was wriggling restlessly. Wei Ci put down his brush. With Chongqing, the little ancestor, around, he knew that he could not stay up late to work tonight. Chongqing is the best. Chongqing felt greatly comforted. She rubbed against him coquettishly. Wei Susu is the best. Although Wei Ci was not married and had a family, his posture when taking care of a child was very standard. It did not take long for him to coax Chongqing until she became tired. He moved his somewhat sore arms, and secretly laughed at Feng Jin's indulgence of the child. He actually raised the child to be so heavy. Chapter 8:14. Wei Ci frowned slightly unhappily. It's so late. Who could it be? It was quite rude to visit in the middle of the night. Chongqing was a child and could not be taken seriously, but it might not be the case for an adult. The gatekeeper lowered his head. This person was honest and dutiful. He did not dare to say a word easily. Moreover, he really could not describe it. The person did not announce his origin at all. He only said that he was a friend of his master. Forget it. I'll go and take a look. Wei Ci sighed and carried Chongqing to the reception hall. When the familiar back came into view, he was so shocked that he almost threw Chongqing out. Of course, even if he wanted to, he could not. Chongqing was too heavy. The owner of the beautiful figure put down her wide cloak hood, revealing a calm and cold face. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the child in Wei Ci's arms. Greetings, my lord. You have a child? Jiang Pingji's gaze fell on Chongqing's face. The child's cheeks were chubby, and there were 2 blushes on her cheeks. She looked especially cute. Wei Ci smiled bitterly. Why do you make fun of me, my lord? This is Chongqing from Huayu's family. You haven't seen her for half a year. I'm afraid you've forgotten. Children grew up with the wind. Not to mention half a year. They might not recognize each other in half a month. She's gained some weight. I almost didn't recognize her. It's too heavy for you to carry. Leave her with me. Jiang Pingji glanced at Wei Ci's body. She always felt that Chongqing could crush him to death. Wei Ci lowered his head in silence, but he still handed Chongqing to her. Why is Huayu's child here? Jiang Pingji asked out of boredom. Huayu probably wanted to have another child, but Chongqing, who was sharp by nature, discovered his intentions. Chongqing probably felt that Huayu was going to abandon her. She felt uncomfortable, and came to Ci for comfort. Children are forgetful. When they wake up tomorrow, they'll forget all their troubles. Children may be young, but they might understand everything. They just can't express it. Wei Ci felt that even if they were children, adults should not casually ignore their existence and feelings. Jiang Pingji responded with an "oh" and declined to comment further. There were a few lamps burning in the hall. The orange candlelight was faintly discernible in the dark, just like his perturbed mood. My lord, what brings you here so late at night? Wei Ci saw that Jiang Pingji did not speak for a long time. She only looked silently at Chongqing, who was slowly sleeping soundly. He only felt a lump in his throat. He was almost pulled into his memories. He could only take the initiative to find a topic to break the current atmosphere. Jiang Pingji patted Chongqing lightly and took the initiative to lower her voice. It was inconvenient to ask you at the banquet earlier. How is the matter in the northern borderline going? Wei Ci's nerves tightened. He threw the fragmented images in his mind into the depths of his memory and reported with a straight face. My lord, everything is going according to plan. Are there any unusual movements in the northern borderline? Did the higher-ups ask about the herdsmen raising rabbits and goats in private? Wei Xi shook his head. There is no such news yet. Because of the horse plague last year, the imperial court's regime was in turmoil. The king of the northern borderline was still in power, but the other tribes in the northern borderline were already complaining. In order to eliminate these voices, the king of the northern borderline took action continuously. They're busy fighting for power, and don't even have time to care about a few big horse farms. So why would they care about the lives of ordinary herdsmen? The chances of them finding out are not high. Whether it was in this life or the previous life, the horse plague was an unavoidable catastrophe for the northern borderline. If it wasn't for the horse plague that greatly damaged the vitality of the northern borderline, and they didn't have the strength to go south for a few years, Dongqing would probably be in danger. The horse plague in the previous life caused the northern borderline to lose the best opportunity to go south. When they recovered their vitality, the central plains was already occupied by a ferocious wolf. At that time, the northern borderline still wanted to take advantage of the chaos in the central plains and reap the benefits. They never expected that Jiang Pingji, who had been fighting to the death with the various feudal vassals, would suddenly stop. She didn't hesitate to cede her interests, adopt the diplomatic policy of forming an alliance, and turn around to attack the northern borderline. When the northern borderline was killed by her, they would turn around and shed all pretense of cordiality with their allies. In the previous life, the northern borderline was cannon fodder. In this life, they would probably end up even worse. The Lord was so diligent in managing the forces in the northern borderline. Wasn't it to sharpen her knife to attack the northern borderline? Wei Xi said. When the northern borderline's royal court finds out, it may already be 2 or 3 years later. By that time, there were only 2 paths in front of the northern borderline. The first was to fight with their backs to the wall. Regardless of the consequences, they would continue to develop the pastures, raise war horses, and increase their combat power. As long as they conquered the central plains, they would have vast and fertile land and inexhaustible resources. They would no longer have to be crowded in the northern borderline, which lacked food. The second was to allocate manpower to deal with the rabbits and sheep that showed signs of flooding, leaving time for the pastures to recover. If it was the former, it would be a huge gamble for the northern borderline. If they won, they would have everything. If they lost, they would lose all their capital. Not even their underwear would be left. If it was the latter, the northern borderline's recovery would be delayed for a few more years. This time was enough for Jiang Pingji to develop her forces. Jiang Pingji was very satisfied when she heard that. If there were a few more multi-purpose angels like Wei Xi, she probably wouldn't have to worry about manpower anymore. Wei Xi felt uneasy all over. He didn't even dare to look at Jiang Pingji. His eyes were evasive. If my lord wants to ask about this, we can talk about it tomorrow. Why did you come so late at night? His lord's identity had just been restored. If it was revealed that she appeared in her subordinate's house late at night, there was no telling what kind of ugly scandals would spread. I came when I wanted to, Jiang Pingji said. Wei Xi was speechless. This was really in line with his lord's usual domineering style. After the two of them finished talking about official matters, the atmosphere fell into a strange silence again. It was like mud that was getting thicker and thicker, unable to be stirred no matter what. Wei Xi's gaze swept over Changsheng, who was sleeping soundly. A question suddenly welled up in his mind. He couldn't suppress that impulse at all. I heard from Huaiyu that Changsheng's nickname was given by my lord. Jiang Pingji looked up at him and grunted. Isn't there a custom of fathers asking passers-by to name their newborn children in order to seek happiness? Huaiyu came to me to ask for it. I can't possibly reject him, can I? What's more, I personally delivered Changsheng. She's likable. Wei Xi muttered. A peaceful and carefree life, a long and happy life. Jiang Pingji frowned secretly. What Wei Xi said was the meaning behind the name she had given Changsheng in the past. Wei Xi said mysteriously, I heard from Huaiyu that he's always wanted another child. When the time comes, I'm afraid he'll come to you for help. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, my literary talent isn't good enough, and my name is also vulgar. Now that I have Changsheng, Huaiyu won't rush to be abused. She was definitely not a coward when it came to calculating, but when it came to literary talent like reciting poems and couplets, she was really anxious. She wasn't illiterate, but in front of a real scholar, she was probably not far from being illiterate. That's not necessarily true, even if it's just for peace of mind. Why you will also ask for a name. Based on what you're saying, I should think about it in advance in case I need it? Jiang Pingji originally wanted Wei Ci to be the gunslinger and help her come up with a male and female name. However, she could tell that Wei Ci wasn't in a good mood, so she could only do it herself. Since we have Changsheng, why don't we get Fusho as well? Whether it's Changsheng or Fusho, it can be a male or female name. The meaning isn't bad. Wei Ci was completely silent. Chapter 8:15. What was he upset about? Was it because of the two children's names? Jiang Pingji's heart skipped a beat. She vaguely guessed something. What special meaning do these two names have to you? Wei Ci secretly took a deep breath to relieve the pulling pain in his chest. His pale face regained some color. There's no special meaning, he answered with a smile, but the smile on his face looked a little haggard and weak. Jiang Pingji did not ask further. She changed the topic and said, "Does Changsheng often stay at your house? Who and where is she?" Wei Ci stood up and led the way. He was the only master in the manor. The other servants had their own residences, so most of the rooms in the manor were empty. Because Changsheng often came over to disturb him, Wei Ci simply prepared a room for her. The interior decoration was very elegant. Jiang Pingji said with a smile, "This girl sleeps soundly, but her sleeping posture is really terrible." The children of rich and powerful families had to be disciplined in their every word and action. Even their sleeping posture had to be corrected. If Changsheng's sleeping posture was in another family, she would be singled out and criticized. Even the servants who served her would be punished. Although the weather is getting warmer, it's not good to keep kicking the blanket. Wei Ci saw that Changsheng's cheeks were red from sleep. She shook her feet and kicked the blanket to the bottom of the bed. He could not help but laugh. He raised his hand and covered her with the thin blanket. Jiang Pingji looked at Wei Ci for a long time without saying a word. Her stare made him uncomfortable. He wanted to hide but could not. In the end, he could only ask Jiang Pingji with a bitter smile, "Why are you looking at me like that, my lord? Is there something on my face?" Jiang Pingji then shifted her gaze away. Wei Ci heaved a long sigh of relief. But what she asked next scared him so much that his limbs became stiff. He broke out in a cold sweat and almost forgot to breathe. "Zixiao, you're almost 24 this year, right? Why is there still no movement at home?" In the era of the livestream audience, 24 years old was the age when one had just graduated from university and was in high spirits. There was no hurry to get married. In Jiang Pingji's era, 24 years old was considered a minor in the eyes of the law. It was not the legal age for marriage. In this era, a normal 24-year-old man, who was slightly dissolute, could have children who could form a baseball team. Look at Wei Ci. Not only was he not married, he did not even have a concubine or a concubine. His usual nightlife was spent with official duties. When he was free, he would either visit his relatives and friends or kill time with books. He had never set foot in the world of mortals. He was clearly an ordinary person in the secular world, but he lived like an ascetic monk. How can a real man start a family without making any contributions? Wei Ci threw out an all-purpose excuse. Moreover, marriage requires the consent of the parents and the words of the matchmaker. Now that my father's clan is in Zhongzhou, I'm afraid they won't be able to attend to Ci. I'm not in a hurry right now. I'll delay it for a few more years. There's no hurry. Jiang Pingji smiled. Haven't made any contributions? How could that be? Zixiao is too humble about this. In terms of contributions, there are very few people who can compare to you. Jiang Pingji's words were not flattery. They came from the bottom of her heart. Wei Ci kept a low profile, and his presence was weak. But how could his contributions be considered small? Not to mention anything else. Just the fact that he had stationed his troops in the fields was enough to earn him a place in the history books. Throughout the ages, How many people had fought their whole lives for the sake of leaving their names in history? In the end, who had succeeded? Wei Xi said that he had not made any contributions. In Jiang Pingji's opinion, he was being overly humble. As for the words of the matchmaker and the orders of the parents, special methods are used during special times. Your relatives and clan are all in Zhongzhou, which is thousands of miles away. In this lifetime, you don't know if you will have the chance to meet them again. If you never see them, do you really intend to be alone for the rest of your life? At that moment, Wei Xi raised his head. His expression was frighteningly calm. His eyes carried a depth that was difficult for others to pry into. Jiang Pingji suggested with a smile, "Why don't we do it this way? I'll be the matchmaker for you." After she finished speaking, she noticed that Wei Xi's gaze and expression had become unusually complicated. It was as if there was a battle going on in his heart. It was difficult to determine the victor. Wei Xi's thoughts were dragged into a swamp by his memories. Fragments of the past flashed before his eyes. Take the child back. You know what to do. Your subject knows that Tengqiumi suffered a hemorrhage during childbirth yesterday. She risked her life to give birth to a child. Your Majesty, do you want to give the child a nickname? Call him Fusho. From now on, he will follow your surname. You have full authority to decide everything. You don't have to ask me. The world had just stabilized. All the officials were worried about the heir. The emperor wanted to appoint the eldest daughter as the heir, but he was obstructed by the imperial censor. At that moment, the emperor was pregnant for the second time. Everyone focused their attention on this child. They were eager to give birth to a crown prince. Unfortunately, the situation was turbulent and natural disasters were endless. The Red Lotus rebels were perverse. They even spread their teachings to the inner residences of the court officials. After careful planning, they prepared for an assassination. In the chaos, the emperor gave birth with great difficulty. It was a male child that everyone had hoped for. He should have been conferred the title of crown prince as soon as he was born. Unfortunately, the child was unlucky. He died the moment he was born. They could only confer him the title of crown prince. After this disaster, it was difficult for the emperor to conceive again. The country could not be without heirs. The matter of appointing the crown princess was brought up to the surface again. This time, the officials were as quiet as chickens. They did not dare to have any objections. Wei Zixiao, you should understand. If Fusho is alive, only death awaits me in Changsheng. I understand. I will take good care of Fusho. Before the 5 countries were unified, the struggle for power was not obvious. But once the countries were unified, all kinds of conflicts broke out. From the emperor's rise to power to his ascension to the throne, the aristocratic families had always been suppressed. After the country was unified, the aristocratic families could only form an alliance in private. They wanted to contend with the emperor and seize power. Wei Xi was clear that there could not be a crown prince at this time. Therefore Fusho, who had just been born, was forced to die young. He changed his appearance and became the son of the Tung concubine in Wei Xi's manner. The key was that the Tung concubine was a made-up character. Fortunately, Wei Xi did not have a strong sense of existence. He behaved according to the rules. The officials who were fighting fiercely did not notice him at all. No one connected Crown Prince Zhangzhou, who died young, with Wei Xi's illegitimate son. When Wei Xi could not extricate himself from his memories, Jiang Pingji's face was magnified in front of his eyes. He was so scared that he suddenly leaned back. Fortunately, both of them were kneeling. Otherwise, he would have hit the back of his head hard on the ground. If I told Zisher that I wanted to give him a beauty, he would definitely be overjoyed. Why are you not willing? Jiang Pingji placed one hand on the ground beside his ear and looked at Wei Xi's panic-stricken and pale face with a smile. She said helplessly, I'm not a dreadful beast. Every time I get close to you, you always show a frightened look. Wei Xi took a deep breath, and his thoughts became much clearer. I'm not very brave. I will naturally be frightened when my lord teases me like this. Jiang Pingji clicked her tongue. His words were rather resentful. Wei Xi said, Can you get up, my lord? This is not appropriate. It will damage your reputation. Your mansion is empty, and there is no one guarding outside. Who would know? Wei Xi could not push her away. His face suddenly turned red and pale. Even the red veins at the corners of his eyes were filled with embarrassment. Jiang Pingji could not force him too much. She could only get up. Chapter 8:16. Wei Xi looked down and turned his head, trying not to look at Jiang Pingji. Of course, the name was not important, but the person. But how would she know what was bothering him? Names could be given, but what if the person was different? He did not want to serve the emperor in this life. She would meet another like-minded partner. What would that have to do with Wei Xi? Two of the most important names to him had been given to someone else, and the future would be completely different from the history he knew. This was exactly what he wanted to see. Even so, the discomfort in his heart could not be alleviated in a short period of time. A man's mind is really hard to understand. Jiang Pingji sighed. Before Wei Xi could react, she suddenly covered her waist and frowned, as if she was enduring the pain. Wei Xi was not in the mood to care about anything else. He quickly asked with concern, "Are you feeling unwell, my lord?" Jiang Pingji's lips were white. "I had to fight in person to conquer Gemin Pass." Before she finished speaking, Wei Xi had already imagined a tragic drama. Countless bloody scenes seemed to flash before his eyes. It has been more than a month since the battle at Gemin Pass. Why hasn't my lord recovered? Wei Xi did not dare to touch her, for fear of accidentally touching her wounds. She was stubborn by nature, and looked weak in front of others. She must have been seriously injured, and had yet to recover. As expected, Jiang Pingji gradually relaxed her brows and said carelessly, "Maybe the wounds are too deep to kill." Wei Xi felt a fire burning in his chest again. Whether it was in his previous life or this one, this person did not take care of her body. What did she mean by not killing? She was still young and healthy. She could roam around without any problems, so there was nothing wrong with her. But when she grew older, wouldn't the old wounds torture her to death? "Xi, call the doctor over." Wei Xi's voice was low, and his words were irresistible. Jiang Pingji did not allow him to do that. She raised her hand and grabbed his hand, preventing him from getting up. "No need, it's just a small injury." She smiled faintly and pulled Wei Xi to her side. She spoke before he could object. "Why don't you look at the sky outside? What day is it now?" If they called for the doctor, the news of Governor Lu staying overnight at his subordinate's house would spread before daybreak. In the past, this would have been a wonderful story. Now that I've recovered my true gender, it's no longer a story but a scandal. Jiang Pingji's words were like a basin of cold water falling from the sky, freezing Wei Xi awake from the inside out. His feverish brain also cooled down. The situation she described was indeed what Wei Xi was afraid of. But it was even more unbearable for him to watch Jiang Pingji endure the pain and not seek treatment. Perhaps the wound accidentally split open. It shouldn't be a problem. When Jiang Pingji said this, she did not let go of Wei Xi's hand. Wei Xi's attention was attracted again, so he did not notice. "Don't talk. Just let me calm down." Wei Xi had no choice but to compromise. He suggested, "My lord, why don't I send you back to the district headquarters in secret?" Jiang Pingji said shamelessly, "There's no need. Returning to the district headquarters would alarm the guards and the gatekeeper. Wouldn't that be revealing the truth? Zixiao, why don't you kindly help me clean up a room? If it's too late, I can make do with Chongqing for the night." What else could Wei Xi say? You're the lord. You're the boss. You have the final say in everything. Just as he was about to get up, he was embarrassed to find that his right hand had been held by her. Their skin that was in contact with each other was sweating, but she did not let go. "I'm sleepy. Zixiao, don't disturb me." Jiang Pingji wanted to lie down and sleep without any explanation. Wei Xi could only swallow the words in his stomach. He maintained his kneeling position stiffly, and looked at the person who was carelessly using his legs as a pillow. He was stunned and could not get angry at all. He kept his eyelids open, which kept fighting. He planned to release his right hand when Jiang Pingji fell asleep. At that moment, Chongqing made full use of her terrible sleeping position. She successfully twisted her body and flipped from the head of the bed to the end. The thin blanket covering her body was kicked to the side of the bed. Her plump body was like a fresh flour pancake, lying on the mattress in a posture of a rooster standing on one leg. She licked her lips. There were only a few teeth in her mouth. Sparkling saliva dripped from the corner of her mouth. Wei Si's eyebrows twitched violently. He carefully tilted his upper body and pulled over the thin blanket that Changxing had abandoned. He covered her properly again. As for carrying Changxing from the end of the bed to the head of the bed and continuing to sleep, he really could not do such a difficult action now. Looking at Changxing's sleeping face, then looking at the person on his lap, who was obviously acting like a hooligan, Wei Si only felt that his head was hurting. Why did he feel that he could no longer hide his identity? Why did he feel that Jiang Pingji did it on purpose? This was probably his hallucination, wasn't it? Wei Si sighed. He could only use his hand to support himself on the high cushion and find a slightly more comfortable position to lean against. The surroundings were too quiet. He thought about many things in his mind. None of them were related to work. He felt that he had fallen. Perhaps he was too sleepy. Wei Si could not help but point to his forehead and fall asleep in a daze. However, the dream was extremely unstable. Various scenes appeared one after another. Those uncles only want my younger brother and don't want Changxing. Grand tutor, I am a burden to mother. Am I not? The girl's words caused Wei Si's heart to ache. The scene changed again. In the blink of an eye, the crying girl became a slender and elegant grand nun. Her expression was as rare as her mother's. Grand tutor, is that my younger brother? Wei Si said in the dream. Your Highness, no one in this world can be your younger brother. Mother told me the truth. Grand tutor, you don't have to be so timid. I will take good care of Grand tutor and my younger brother. Although they were not official, they were blood relatives after all. In the 18th year of Yongqin's reign in the Jiang dynasty, Emperor Chun was seriously ill. Everyone in the court was in a state of panic. It was at this time that a case named Crown Prince Zhangzhua shocked the court. I am Crown Prince Zhangzhua. Unfilial son. The more time passed, the more chaotic the dream became. Wei Si stood on the spot in a daze. In the chaos, he did not know what was happening in the world. The scenes melted in an instant and twisted into countless demons and monsters. They all laughed sinisterly and pounced on him. Just as he was about to be swallowed by the demons, Wei Si shouted in horror. His body suddenly leaned forward. Jiang Pingji was pretending to be asleep at first. Later on, she really fell asleep. When the sky was just beginning to brighten, she was awakened by the subtle movements of Wei Si's nightmare. Wei Si was covered in cold sweat. His face was pale, and his lips were trembling slightly because of fear. Chapter 8:17. According to the plot described by the audience in the streaming room, it was time for a romantic and melodramatic kiss. Sure enough, she shouldn't have trusted the group of singles in the streaming room. If a group of singles had a strategy to seduce someone, would they still be single? Jiang Pingji secretly ridiculed them. She didn't know that Wei Si was also frightened by her. First, he had a nightmare. After waking up, he was shocked. After the shock, he suffered a tragic blow. His nose bumped into someone's face. It couldn't be more awkward. Wei Si couldn't care less about the pain. He hurriedly prepared to bow down and apologize. Unfortunately, he had maintained his kneeling position for a whole night. Jiang Pingji even used him as a lap pillow. Now his legs were numb, and he almost lost feeling. He sat on the ground in a sorry state. Tears welled up in his eyes. He looked pitiful. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and rubbed her cheek. She didn't tease Wei Si about this embarrassing incident, lest she provoked him. Was it a nightmare just now? Jiang Pingji returned to normal, as if the episode just now had never happened. Look at you. Even your face is covered in cold sweat. Because the nightmare lasted too long, Wei Si's reaction was slightly slow. He didn't even have the energy to investigate what happened just now. I had a nightmare, Wei Si said with lingering fear. I dreamed of many evil ghosts. They almost tore me apart, he panted. Fear flashed through his dark, jade-like eyes, as if the lingering power of the nightmare had yet to dissipate. Jiang Pingji tilted her head. She looked curious. She said, the evil ghosts in the nightmare? Just now, I heard you saying things like Crown Prince Zhongzhua, unfilial son, His Highness, and so on. What exactly did you dream of? Why are you so scared? If Wei Xi's complexion was said to be a little human before, when Jiang Pingji asked this question, his face suddenly turned as white as a sheet. Wei Xi opened his mouth. Something was stuck in his throat. He couldn't make a sound. An impulse to escape surged in his heart. Zixiao. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and placed it on his forehead. His forehead, which was covered in sweat, was cold and sticky. It gave people an extremely uncomfortable feeling. She touched ice, but to Wei Xi, it was scorching hot. It was like a cluster of flames quietly emitting warmth and dispelling the cold. My lord. Wei Xi was hesitant. Under the other party's concerned gaze, he awkwardly looked away. I'm fine. Jiang Pingji frowned slightly. How did Wei Xi's behavior look like he was fine? Who was the Crown Prince Zhongzhua that Wei Xi dreamt of? His Highness Changsheng was definitely not the little fat boy who was sleeping soundly beside him. That person had a very important meaning to Wei Xi. As for the mutterings like unfilial son, kneel down for good fortune and longevity, unfilial son pretending to be the heir of the emperor, and deserved to be executed, she felt that the information was too much. Jiang Pingji asked, You haven't answered me yet. What did you dream about? Wei Xi's heart sank. The warmth that he had painstakingly gathered dissipated in an instant. He trembled and said, I can't remember clearly. I only remember that the dream just now was very scary. There were thousands of malicious ghosts chasing after me, demanding my life. I woke up when I stepped on air. Jiang Pingji thought of the audience's advice and comforted him. Dreams and reality are opposites. Don't take it to heart. It's already dawn outside. I see that you haven't slept well all night. Why don't you go and get some sleep? The matters in the government office can be postponed for half a day. Wei Xi's heart calmed down a little, and he heaved a long sigh of relief. Jiang Pingji comforted him like that, which meant that the previous story could be forgotten. Thank you for your understanding, my lord. Jiang Pingji put on a wide hood and sneaked out from the side door. With her skills, she would naturally not be discovered. Wei Xi rubbed his dizzy head and prepared to go back and get some sleep. 5 years had passed since he returned to his youth. He thought that he had gradually forgotten about the past. Who knew that he would be caught red-handed by his lord last night? He was really scared out of his wits just now. He knew that Her Majesty was not a suspicious person. But she was more difficult to deal with than a suspicious person, because any clues could become a stepping stone for her to pry into the truth. Ordinary people could not hide from her eyes at all. Since the establishment of the Jiang Kingdom, the aristocratic families had formed an alliance. They seemed powerful, but when had they not been manipulated by her like monkeys in the palm of her hand? The aristocratic families were like prey in a spider's web. The more they struggled, the more powerless they became. In the face of such an empress, he had to be tense at all times, lest the other party see through his disguise in a moment of carelessness. He had no reason not to be afraid. Even if Her Majesty had just turned 18 years old, she was still not to be trifled with. Since Her Majesty's rise to power, the aristocratic families had been like a carrot, peeling off a layer of the other party's skin from time to time. After being peeled like this for 18 years, even the fattest carrot had become a thin carrot. Every time the aristocratic families were full of confidence that they would be able to make a comeback, reality would always slap their cheeks swollen. The emperor and his ministers, who were extremely harmonious in the imperial court, fought to the death in the imperial court. In terms of danger, there were only 3 times that it was the most dangerous. The first time was the riot of the Red Lotus Group. It happened to coincide with Her Majesty's difficult labor and birthday. Many people mistakenly said that Her Majesty had died. Who said that I had a difficult labor? A group of ministers hurriedly cried and mourned. When Her Majesty appeared with a sneer on her face, more than a dozen faces uniformly turned gray. The second time was when Her Majesty wantonly carried out imperial examinations and land reform. The interests of the aristocratic families were affected, and they secretly planned a palace coup. The third time was in the 18th year of Yongchen. Her Majesty was seriously ill and bedridden for several months. Crown Prince Zhangzhou, supported by the aristocratic families, tried to force her to abdicate. Thinking of the last reason, Wei Xi felt waves of pain in his chest. It was so painful that he could not help but cover his chest, and his face turned pale. The son that he had painstakingly taught for more than a decade was actually stupid enough to be used by others. Instead, he turned against his biological parents. Was the temptation of imperial power and the throne really so terrifying? Wei Xi returned to his dream in a daze. He heard a familiar roar. I was originally the son of the emperor, the legitimate crown prince. Now, I have been framed by scoundrels and become the son of a concubine. Is this really fair? He stood there in a daze. His divine senses were withdrawn from his body, and he could not react. Every word pierced his heart. Who told you that you are the legitimate crown prince? Crown Prince Zhangzhou was conferred the title posthumously. You are still alive, so this posthumous title is naturally invalid. Now you are treacherously trying to abdicate and trying to kill the emperor. You deserve to be executed. I have never wanted you to be the crown prince. You are standing in front of me. Do you want to reprimand me for making you the son of a concubine and ruining your glory, splendor, and wealth? Or do you think that you are more capable than Changsheng, that you can govern the world and protect the people? Zixiao is a peerless scholar of the nation. He has taught you in every way. But what have you learned from him? You are so stupid. Other than being used by others and falling headlong into the trap that I have set, what other abilities do you have? You are so stupid. Other than the right to inherit the throne and his identity as a prince, Wei Xi had never wronged this child. In the end, he was called a scoundrel. Chapter 8:18. When Wei Xi woke up again, the sun had already climbed to the top of his head. He could still hear the sound of munching. He turned his head and saw a pile of flour cakes lying on the ground with a plate of snacks by her hand. Flour cakes? No, the chubby Changxing noticed the movement and turned to look at Wei Xi. Wei Su is awake. Changxing giggled and was about to get up when her round eyes swept across the crumbs on her hands. She seemed to have thought of something and guiltily turned to kneel. Quietly, she covered the plate of snacks with her buttocks. Thinking that Wei Xi would not be able to see it, Wei Xi was speechless. Feng Huayu, if you don't restrain your daughter, she will really go crazy. Changxing, come here. Wei Xi's voice was very hoarse as he waved at Changxing. Changxing got up shyly and pushed the plate of snacks aside with her chubby toes, trying to destroy the evidence. Wei Susu. Wei Xi pinched Changxing's small hair bun and smiled weakly. Don't eat secretly, lest your father resents me for starving you. Changxing lowered her head. She was young, but she also knew that she was guilty. She originally wanted to bring it over to share with her friend Wei Susu, but she could not bear the hunger, so she secretly held it and ate it. Unknowingly, there were only scraps left. Coincidentally, Wei Xi woke up at this time and was frightened. Is Wei Susu sick? She slept for a long time. In Wei Xi's mansion, no one else could be considered as the master except for him. Changxing naturally came and went as she pleased, and the servants did not dare to restrain her. She's not sick, she just doesn't want to get up. Changxing nodded and made a no sound. She quietly covered her mouth and said, Changxing doesn't like to get up either, the nanny is bad. Every time she wanted to stay in bed, the nanny would always carry her out of bed. Every time this happened, Changxing would be extremely resentful. Why couldn't she be fatter and heavier, so that the nanny could not carry her? Wei Xi laughed involuntarily. He asked the servant to take care of Changxing while he went to take a bath and wash off the sticky sweat on his body. Only then did he feel refreshed. Your mouth has never been idle all day long. Wei Xi was haunted by nightmares and his breath was weak. He was panting after 2 steps while carrying the heavy Changxing. Fortunately, the two families were not far apart. Otherwise, he would have lost his life. I've really troubled you last night. Changxing is a stubborn child. I really can't do anything about her. Feng Jin had already come back from work for lunch, so he asked Wei Xi to stay for lunch. The Feng family was strict and did not like to be extravagant. Therefore, The lunch at Feng Jin's house leaned towards a vegetarian diet, which suited Wei Xi's taste. Children are all like this. They like to stick to others. This is their nature. After lunch, Wei Xi regained some energy. Feng Jin did not suspect anything else. He asked, Zixiao, are you also worried about what happened in the morning? Wei Xi was surprised and asked in a daze, what happened in the morning? Everyone's office was not in the same place, and they could not meet each other every day. So Feng Jin did not think that Wei Xi did not go to the government office at all today. About the Wanzhou government, Feng Jin's brows were tightly furrowed. He was rather vexed. The prefecture? Couldn't they just use the original state capital? My lord is not a person who likes to be extravagant, and she will not waste money and manpower just for her own enjoyment. Wei Xi said without thinking. Could it be that Huayu has been frowning because of this matter? Feng Jin said. The previous state capital has been burned down by the remnants of the Tsingyi army. If we choose that place as the state capital, it will take at least a year for it to take shape. As for Xiaoyu's side, it will cost nearly 1,000,000 taels, not to mention other labor costs. Because of the war in the north, the people of the original state capital had long dispersed. If they rebuilt the state capital there, not only would they have to spend a lot of money, but they would also have to spend a lot of effort to recruit labor. It would be a waste of time and effort. It was not worth it. Moreover, the state capital was similar to the central brain of the entire power, so they could not be careless. Wei Xi furrowed his brows. After thinking deeply for a while, he made a decision. What did my lord say? Feng Jin said. My lord's intention is clear. It will not delay official business and waste money and manpower. As for where to choose, she has no opinion. Wei Xi asked again. What about the others? Feng Jin paused, then said rather awkwardly. The others' opinion. They want to set the state capital in Shangjing. Shangjing. This was the same as Wei Xi's choice. However, looking at Feng Jin's expression, one could tell that he was struggling in his heart. It was not appropriate to set the state capital in Shangjing. Huayu doesn't seem to agree. Wei Xi used a declarative tone. Feng Jin laughed bitterly and said, Shangjing is the capital of Dongqing. If my lord sets the state capital there, I'm afraid it will cause gossip. Moreover, Shangjing experienced a huge earthquake. Every time I go near there, I feel terrified. What happened that year is still vivid in my mind. Back then the power of the earthquake was too great. How many lives were lost? Even though more than 2 years had passed, every time Feng Jin recalled the scene of that day, he still felt terrified. The imperial court has moved the capital to Qinzhou. Shangjing is no longer the capital. If other people were gossiping, just let them be. His Highness might not take it to heart. Even if there are complaints in the imperial city of Qinzhou, can they remove my lord's state magistrate? A disdainful smile appeared at the corner of Wei Xi's mouth. He continued, the earthquake that year destroyed Shangjing. How many people lost their homes? Now that Shangjing is a wasteland, we can't just leave it be. If we make Shangjing the state capital, we can recruit the surrounding refugees and reduce hidden dangers. That's one of the reasons. Secondly, Shangjing is an ancient city after all. Some buildings can still be used. It can reduce expenses. As the former capital, Shangjing had a different meaning. It was the center of the entire Wanzhou. Traffic was accessible from all directions. If it wasn't for Dongqing's emperor occupying it, the state capital of Wanzhou would have been set in Shangjing. Feng Jin sighed and said, I know this is the case, but I'm still afraid. I'm worried that the earthquake will happen again. Wei Xi still had some reasons that he didn't say. There were more than 2 reasons for setting the state capital in Shangjing. There was another more important reason. The local gentry in Shangyang County were too arrogant. The Feng family didn't manage things, and the others were even more unscrupulous. Jiang Pingji had been staying in Fengyi County and couldn't keep an eye on these demons all the time. They had more opportunities to cause trouble. If the state capital was set in what used to be Shangjing, the gentry in Shangyang County would naturally be quiet and wouldn't dare to act rashly. Whether it was in his previous or current life, Wei Xi knew that his lord would definitely fight with the aristocratic families. Even if his lord was from an aristocratic family, she wouldn't be merciful. Wei Xi only felt a headache when he thought of the struggles after the establishment of the Jiang dynasty. Restraining the authority of the aristocratic families couldn't wait until the country was unified. If possible, he had to suppress them now. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.